Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. At least 28 people are injured after an attack in Germany. The incident took place in the same city. Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth are scheduled to visit this weekend. What do we know so far? The Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to vote today to advance President Trump's nominee to lead the FBI, Kash Patel, to the full Senate for confirmation. Over $800 million in cuts for a new embassy in South Sudan and a DEI scholarship in Myanmar. The savings are racking up at DOGE. We break down the latest. Education Secretary nominee Linda McMahon will face her confirmation hearing for the department that President Trump wants to kill. We have more from Capitol Hill.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Today is Thursday, February 13th. I'm Don Ma. President Trump said he plans to unveil reciprocal tariffs today. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said he will hold a news conference on the tariffs at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. He did not give details about the plan. Trump has already announced 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports beginning March 12th. He also imposed 10% tariffs on goods from China and a 30-day hold on tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico. The news conference will happen before Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the White House. Modi is scheduled to arrive at around 4 p.m. Eastern Time today. Meanwhile, at least 28 people were injured after an attack in Germany. A man from Afghanistan allegedly drove a car into a crowd earlier today. The attack took place in the city of Munich. This comes as the city prepares for a top-level security conference. Police later described the attack, while Germany's Chancellor promised no leniency for the suspect.
After the perpetrator drove into the crowd, and it looked as if he was going to continue his journey, a shot was seemingly fired in the direction of the perpetrator or at the vehicle. Police escorts then overpowered the perpetrator.
Anyone who commits crimes in Germany will not only be severely punished and sent to prison, they must also expect that they will not be able to continue their stay in Germany. And that also applies to countries where it is very difficult to repatriate someone. That's why the government I lead has managed to resume and carry out repatriations to Afghanistan, despite the lack of diplomatic relations.
The 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker allegedly drove into a crowd of around 1,500 people. The victims were at a rally by a German trade union. Security has been in sharp focus in Germany ahead of a federal election next week. The Munich Security Conference is also set to take place this weekend in the same city where today's attack took place. Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and others are scheduled to attend. The Senate Judiciary Committee is currently deciding whether to advance Kash Patel's nomination to lead the FBI. Democratic senators delayed Patel's vote last month after his first confirmation hearing. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said Democrats are trying to get him to testify again after he already testified for 5 hours, submitted thousands of documents as well, and wrote 150 pages in response to lawmakers' questions. Senator Dick Durbin accused Patel of directing a purge of the FBI before being officially confirmed as director. Patel's team denies the claim and says he has been patiently waiting for the confirmation process to play out. And the cuts made by the Department of Government Efficiency are nearing $3.5 billion. The White House says major savings have been achieved at the Department of Education. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the latest numbers.
At the Department of Education, over $880 million from about 90 contracts have been terminated, and $15 million in DEI training grants were canceled at the same department. Meanwhile, $30 million in consulting agreements with the Department of Education and the General Services Administration have been axed. Trump issued an executive order against diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, in the federal government on the first day of his new presidency. Since then, $1 billion from 104 DEI contracts have been canceled. Other figures include nearly $60 million that FEMA staff sent to house illegal immigrants in New York City hotels. The White House has sought to claw back that money. Some cuts have been made in faraway nations. For example, a $45 million DEI scholarship in Myanmar, also known as Burma, and nearly $785 million from a canceled contract to build a new embassy in South Sudan. Media companies weren't spared the DOGE axe either. 500,000 in Politico subscriptions have been canceled, as well as funding to the New York Times and the Associated Press. DOGE has been promoting its findings and actions on X, owned by DOGE leader Elon Musk. Musk defended the work of his organization next to President Trump on Tuesday, saying he seeks common sense controls on the federal bureaucracy.
We have this unelected, fourth unconstitutional branch of government, which is the bureaucracy, which has, in a lot of ways, currently more power than any elected representative.
DOGE has faced a backlash from many congressional Democrats and progressive groups, and multiple lawsuits have been filed. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Education Secretary nominee Linda McMahon is the next cabinet pick of President Trump's to face a showdown with lawmakers. And the first he has told to put yourself out of a job. We'll tune into that right now.
Thank you again, Ms. McMahon, for coming before this committee and continuing the discussion on how we can work together to improve student success and get our education system back on track. And with that, I yield to Senator Sanders, the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. McMahon, nice to see you again. Let me begin by thanking teachers all over this country. This is a very difficult time to be a teacher. And talking to teachers in Vermont, and I think teachers all over the country, what they are telling me is they are spending a lot of their times not only teaching math and English, but dealing with the emotional needs of kids, because among other things, our kids are struggling in many, many ways. So it's a tough time to be a teacher, and I want to thank the teachers very much for the extraordinary work that they are doing, especially for some of the most vulnerable kids in our country. You know, way back in 1863, as we recall from our history books, Abraham Lincoln was in Gettysburg. And he looked out on a field where soldiers by the thousands had just died in the struggle against slavery. And he talked about the need to maintain a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That was that short but very powerful Gettysburg Address. And I think in this country today, there is a growing fear that instead of having a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we are looking at a government of billionaires, by billionaires, and for billionaires, whose job is not to improve life for ordinary people, but to make the people on top even wealthier. So in the midst of massive income and wealth inequality, where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, the Republicans in the House yesterday introduced a budget resolution that would provide massive tax breaks to the people on top, and they would pay for those tax breaks for billionaires by cutting Medicaid, education, and programs that working families throughout this country desperately need. That is exactly the wrong thing to do. At a time when millions and millions of working families are struggling, our job is to protect those families and not worry about the billionaires who have never had it so good. But it's not just cuts in Medicaid, as devastating as that would be. We're looking at, if the Republicans get their way, massive cuts to education. And I should also say that the people who are trying to privatize Social Security, privatize Medicare, privatize Medicaid, privatize the Veterans Administration are precisely the same people who are trying to privatize public education in America. We must not allow that to happen. In America, we must not allow our educational system to become a two-tier system A system which says that if you have the money, you're going to get help from the federal government, you're going to get a voucher to send your kid to a school that may cost $50,000, $60,000 a year, while the public schools will end up being segregated not just by race, but by class. Most families in America do not have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to send their kids to private schools, and it's absurd to provide public money to make that possible. Our job is not to take away money from public schools to give it to private schools. It is to strengthen public education in America. Further, President Trump has talked about abolishing the Department of Education. Yes, I think everybody on this committee wants to see us go after waste and bureaucracy in every agency of government. But what we must understand is that when we talk about the Department of Education, they are providing vital resources for 26 million children in this country who live in high poverty school districts. Is it the responsibility of the federal government to say that every kid in America, whether you're poor, middle class, rich, gets a quality education? It is. And that is what a lot of what the Department of Education does. Department of Education provides millions of public school students who have disabilities, emotional problems, physical problems, provides them with help. It provides Pell Grants and other important financial assistance that over 7 million low-income students need to get a higher education. So the goal is not to abolish the Department of Education, it is to make it more effective and to make sure that it addresses the educational needs in this country. Mr. Chairman, in my view, we need a Secretary of Education who understands that in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, we should have the best educational system on this planet, from child care to graduate school. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we're going to attract the best and the brightest to the teaching profession. You know what? We have to pay teachers the kinds of salaries that they deserve, which is why I've introduced legislation that says no teacher in America should earn less than $60,000 a year. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that schools do not end at 2:30 or 3 o'clock. We need strong after-school programs. We need strong summer programs. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we've got to invest in mental health. We need a Secretary of Education who understands that we have got to fully fund the Individuals with Disability Education Act. So there are a lot of questions I have for Mrs. McMahon. I very much appreciate her being here and look forward to the discussion we'll have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. And now to introduce Ms. McMahon, we'll start with Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, committee members, for allowing me to have an opportunity to talk about my good friend, Linda McMahon. I will say that one of the things I love about the Ranking Member is his passion about the things he cares deeply about. He and I don't agree on the conclusions or the solutions, but I do believe that he is a thoughtful person who cares about the issues, and I hope that doesn't hurt your reelection bid. But let me say this. I'm not a billionaire. Never have been, likely never will be. But I am a kid who grew up in a single-parent household, mired in poverty, whose mother worked 2 jobs, trying to keep the lights on. I went to 4 different elementary schools by the 4th grade. When I think about the issue of education, I think about how in the world do we ever get to a meritocracy if the vast majority of the kids today are going to segregated schools that are failing those kids. 13 schools in Maryland where the average kid, 99% of the kids cannot perform at grade level. I think about Chicago on the south side where I spent a lot of time, where 95% of the kids cannot perform at grade level. I think about Charleston, South Carolina, my hometown, where 60+% of African American males don't go to college. I think about the quagmire pit of failure that is consistently the case in inner city schools across America. You talk about the resegregation of America's public schools, it's already happened. It's happening right now. Our public education spends $850 billion to disappoint families, millions of families across this country. 10% of the resources come from the federal government, and yet 80 to 90% of all the rules that suppress performance come from Washington. The average employee at the Department of Education, these numbers are a few years ago, and these unfortunately aren't part of my speech. Bernie changed my speech for me. Is about $106,000, where the average teacher makes $55,000. Those numbers are 4 or 5 years old. But here's my point. My point is a simple point. I'm a guy who understands the weight of a poor education system and the benefit of a good education system, because I've experienced both. I chose to introduce Linda not because I have an affinity for billionaires, though I might now, actually, because I have a passion for quality that changes the trajectory of poor kids' lives permanently. I can't think of a more important civil rights issue today than public education and the education of our kids. I can't think of a better person to take on that challenge than someone that I had confidence when she was the administrator of the SBA. I can't think of someone better to take on this challenge than someone that took a regional company, WWE, and made it into the global powerhouse that it is today than the co-founder, chief executive, Linda McMahon. I can't think of someone better to do the job than someone who served on our own state board of education, who was a trustee at Sacred Heart University, and who led the policy initiatives at the America First Policy Institute. That would be Linda McMahon. I can tell you that there are a lot of questions I'd like to answer, but I don't have time. But I can tell you this. For the poorest kids in our country, disillusioned about the American dream, the answers they are looking for rarely come from Washington. With all of our good intentions, the Department of Education has simply failed the poorest kids in the United States of America, the greatest nation on the planet. To turn that around, we need someone who's already succeeded in business and in government. And let me just close with this. The Department of Education doesn't educate kids. It's a federal agency. Local communities and local teachers educate kids. Our Department of Education is a federal behemoth that needs to focus on getting more money in the hands of more students so that they have a better chance. And yes, I do believe that competition makes your quality go up and your cost go down. Charter schools prove that, private schools prove that, and finally, Pell Grants. Pell Grants take public dollars to private schools. Unfortunately, poor black kids today, the vast majority, won't have a Pell Grant. Why? Because if you don't graduate from high school, if you don't have proficiency in reading, math, and science, the likelihood of you going to college is zero. Let's improve our K through 12 system so that more of America's poor rural kids and inner city kids both have the experience I have of realizing their version of the American dream.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Very powerful. Senator Britt.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you. My colleague nailed it. Chair Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, and members of this committee, I am honored to join you today to introduce President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Education, my friend, Linda McMahon. It is clear that our current education system isn't working. We have the status quo, and that's actually failing our kids. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the latest NAEP scores show that students' reading and math scores are down in almost every single state, to the point where only 30% of 8th graders are meeting reading proficiency levels. The status quo in education just hasn't failed students. It's failed parents, just like me. And very respectfully, Mr. Ranking Member, the America that you just described, the one that you're fearful will be created, it already exists. Our students deserve better. Our parents deserve better. We have to do something different in order to achieve a different result. For far too long, the Department of Education has catered to far-left bureaucrats at the expense of moms and dads. It has pushed for school closures, removed parental rights from the equation, promoted radical ideologies in the classroom, and supported allowing men and boys to play in women and girls' sports. Enough is enough. We need a change agent at the Department of Education, and that change agent is Linda McMahon. She is the perfect antidote to what is wrong with education in this country. Linda has an immensely successful track record as a business executive, as a leader of a government agency, and at the America First policy, as an America First policy advocate. She is not just an overwhelmingly qualified nominee for Secretary of Education, but a nominee who can make a real difference at the department that sorely needs it. She's also a grandmother of 6, with a personal stake in the quality of our education system. She understands how important it is that our kids learn what they're supposed to, and how important it is for parents to be empowered. I'm right there with her. And that's not the only mission that Linda will pursue at the Secretary of Education as a secretary. Attending a 4-year college or university is the right path for many Americans, but it's not the only one available to graduating high schoolers, and Linda will ensure that students know that. Linda led efforts to empower the American worker at AFPI, and I am confident that she will make aligning our education system and our workforce systems a priority at the Department of Education. That means strengthening 21st century skills training and job preparedness, bridging the gap between technical school programs and industries, and expanding apprenticeships and credentialing programs. Linda McMahon is someone who knows how to reform our education system so it actually prepares our kids for the future, while also empowering parents to make decisions that affect their children's lives. She has the experience as an executive. She already demonstrated her immense ability to get the government out of the way as head of the Small Business Administration. And she knows both K-12 and higher education, as my distinguished colleague, Senator Scott, said, in serving on the Connecticut State Board of Education and the Sacred Heart University Board. She was on that since 2004. Her confirmation as Secretary of Education will be a monumental step towards preserving the American dream and making a bright future possible for the next generation of Americans. Let's put parents in the driver's seat. Let's return to the fundamentals of the classroom learning and teach kids the skills they need to actually achieve their goals. Let's put education in the hands of states, not unaccountable federal bureaucrats. And for our kids' sake, let's confirm my friend, Linda McMahon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Britt. Ms. McMahon, now for your opening statement, and you're welcome to introduce your guest.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cassidy. Yes, I'd like to introduce my daughter, Stephanie McMahon, Paul Levesque, her husband, and my son, Shane McMahon. I'm so happy to have them here, and many friends from have come from far places, so I welcome having them here today and appreciate that they're here. So, thank you, Chairman Cassidy, Ranking Member Sanders, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to have your consideration to serve as the Secretary of the Department of Education. And I'd like to thank both Senators Scott and Britt for their introductions.
Members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts business. We ask you to respect that. I'm sorry.
Certainly. And I'd like to thank both Senators Scott and Britt for their introductions and for the opportunity to welcome my friends and family. Thank you all so much for being here with me today. I would also like to thank President Trump for his confidence in me to lead a department whose mission and authority were a special focus of his campaign. He pledged to make American education the best in the world, return education to the states where it belongs, and free American students from the education bureaucracy through school choice. November proved that Americans overwhelmingly support the president's vision, and I am ready to enact it. Education is the issue that determines our national success and prepares American workers to win the future. I've been passionate about education since my earliest college days when I studied to earn a teaching certificate. This has continued through my business career as a Connecticut State Board of Education member, as a university trustee, and as the chair of the America First Policy Institute, which advocates for workforce development, parental choice, and accountability in higher education. I'm also a mother and a grandmother, and I join millions of American parents who want better schools for our kids and grandkids. The legacy of our nation's leadership in education is one that every person in this room embraces with pride. Unfortunately, many Americans today are experiencing a system in decline. The latest scores from the nation's report card show achievement in K through 12 math and reading at their lowest level in years. More than 2/3 of public colleges are beset by violent crime on campuses every year. And most tragically, student suicide rates have dramatically increased over the last 2 decades. We can do better. We can do better for the elementary and junior high school student by teaching basic reading and mathematics, for the college freshman facing censorship or anti-Semitism on campus, and for parents and grandparents who worry that their children and grandchildren are no longer taught American values and true history. In many cases, our wounds are caused by the excessive consolidation of power in our federal education establishment. So what's the remedy? Fund education freedom, not government-run systems. Listen to parents, not politicians. Build up careers, not college debt. Empower states, not special interests. Invest in teachers, not Washington bureaucrats. If confirmed as Secretary, I will work with Congress to reorient the department toward helping educators, not controlling them. My experience as a business owner and leader of the Small Business Administration, as a public servant in the state of Connecticut, and more than a decade of service as a college trustee has taught me to put parents, teachers, and students, not bureaucracy, first. Outstanding teachers are tired of political ideology in their curriculum and red tape on their desks. And that's why school choice is a growing movement across the nation. It offers teachers and parents an alternative to classrooms that are micromanaged from Washington, D.C. We should also emphasize career-focused education, especially in cutting-edge STEM fields, where American companies need high-skilled employees. Our workers deserve more post-secondary pathways, career-aligned programs, apprenticeships, and on-the-job learning, and jobs in tech, skilled trades, and healthcare for non-college degree holders. Those who do attend college deserve transparent costs and courses of study aligned to workforce demand. The United States is the world leader by far in emerging technologies like AI and blockchain, and we need to invest in American students who want to become tech pioneers. We should encourage innovative new institutions, develop smart accountability systems, and tear down barriers to entry so that students have real choice and universities are not saddling future families with unsurmountable debt. We must protect all students from discrimination and harassment. And if I am confirmed, the department will not stand idly by while Jewish students are attacked and discriminated against. It will stop forcing schools to let boys and men into female sports and spaces. And it will protect the rights of parents to direct the moral education of their children. The opportunity before us these next 4 years is momentous. I look forward to working with the committee, our nation's parents, teachers, and students, and education leaders from all political perspectives to build a better future for every American learner. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I shall begin. Everybody's rightly focused on the fact that we have a problem with reading scores, and they've been anchored where they are for quite some time, with an incredibly high percentage of children not reading at grade level. And the old kind of truism that kids learn to read by grade 3 or 4 and they read to learn thereafter. But they're not learning to read by grade 3 or 4. So that said, dyslexia, according to NIH kind of reviewed literature, affects 20% of our population. Those 20% learn to read differently, and if their differences are not acknowledged, then they will be among those, almost an anchor holding reading scores down. Now, it would just intuitively make sense to diagnose the child with dyslexia as early as possible. Most states do not screen. That said, you can see where I'm going with my own thoughts. But what would be your approach to addressing the issue of dyslexia, which is frankly ignored, not in a state like New Hampshire, where Governor Hassan actually put in such programs, but in other states? What would be your approach to make sure that the child who is dyslexic is diagnosed at an early stage and receives the intervention that she or he would need to receive?
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Cassidy, and I know this is a very sensitive subject for you, since I believe it is your son that does have dyslexia, as you and I discussed when I visited with you in your office.
My daughter, but that's
I'm sorry, it's your daughter. But I certainly very much would like to be sure that we are looking to diagnose issues like dyslexia early, because we have found that it can be turned around. So I'd like to work with you and understand how we could have better approach for that in our school systems.
You had mentioned that you would not tolerate the anti-Semitism that has been on the rise. What steps would you take to make sure the backlog of anti-Semitism cases at the Office of Civil Rights is processed and those responsible for illegal discrimination held accountable?
Senator Kennedy, Cassidy, I think that by far what we saw happening on our campuses was absolutely deplorable. Kids locked in libraries, afraid to come out. Now, I believe in freedom of speech on campus, open debate, and we should encourage that. But we cannot allow violence happening on our campuses. That puts all students in an unsafe place. And if I were confirmed as the Secretary of Education, I would want to make sure that the presidents of those universities and those colleges are taking very strong measures not to allow those to happen. They can call in the police, they can do whatever they need to do, set standards, and to make sure those standards are upheld. We cannot allow that kind of violence to take place on our college campuses.
Now, there's a current backlog in the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education to address this. Do you have any specific plans about how you could help them address that backlog?
Well, I'd like very much to be confirmed and to be able to get into the department and understand that backlog, to talk to those lawyers who were there, and let's focus on what we need to do to clear out that backlog. And I'd look forward to doing that.
President Trump is reportedly drafting an executive order requiring the Secretary of Education to develop a plan for downsizing the Department of Education and working with Congress to eliminate entirely. Yes or no? Do you agree that since the department was created by Congress, it would need an act of Congress to actually close the Department of Education?
And certainly President Trump understands that we'll be working with Congress. We'd like to do this right. We'd like to make sure that we are presenting a plan that I think our senators could get on board with and our Congress could get on board with, that would have a better functioning Department of Education, but certainly does require congressional action.
Okay. In terms of the plans to downsize, what would be the components of that plan that would not require congressional approval?
Well, I do believe, Senator, that there are departments of education that are established by statute, and those particular departments we'd have to pay particular attention to. But long before there was a Department of Education, we fulfilled the programs of our educational system. Are there other areas, other agencies where parts of the Department of Education could better serve our students and our parents on a local level. And I am really all for the President's mission, which is to return education to the states. I believe, as he does, that the best education is closest to the child and not certainly
If the
from
department
Washington,
is
D.C.
downsized, would the states and localities still receive the federal funding which they currently receive?
Yes.
Okay. With
It
that,
is not the President's goal to defund the programs. It is only to have it operate more efficiently.
With that, I yield to Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we talk about education, kind of we're looking at it in a vacuum. We're talking about the struggles that low-income kids are having, and that's true. But Mrs. McMahon, you are also aware that in America we have more income and wealth inequality than we've ever had before. You are aware that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. You are aware, I suspect, that teachers are dealing with kids who are literally homeless, kids who come from dysfunctional families where there is violence. Does it concern you in America that we are living in a society where the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck? And how do you think that impacts our educational system?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. First of all, let me say that I believe that teaching is one of the most noble professions that we have in our country, and we have so many good, dedicated teachers to help our students. I do think that we are trapping students often in low-performing schools, and that's why the President has such a strong policy towards school choice.
But you will agree, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you will agree that you can't just look at education. The truth is that middle class, upper middle class public schools in America generally do pretty well. But if you are homeless, if you were a homeless person and you had kids, the odds of your kids doing pretty well are not good. I'm just asking you, what do you think about the massive level of income and wealth inequality, the fact that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty? Is that something you think you might want to pay attention to?
Well, certainly, Senator, I do believe that we want to make sure that every child in our country has the opportunity to have equal access to a quality education. And the Department of Education really is not setting economic policy in the country.
Well,
we should focus on educating our children, and we should focus on it at the local level.
let me ask you this. You mentioned correctly that we have many great teachers in America, right?
Yes.
If you as a businesswoman wanted to attract the best and the brightest, would you be starting them off after they leave school, maybe $50,000, $60,000 in debt with salaries of $35,000 or $40,000? Or would you say, we respect, you talked about teaching being the noblest profession. I agree with you. Would you agree with me, support my legislation that says no teacher in America should earn at least $60,000 a year?
Well, certainly the pay to teachers is up to the states where those teachers reside. I do believe we should pay our teachers fairly. They spend so much time with our students, and they should be well compensated for their job.
Paying them fairly, nobody in the world will disagree with you. I mean, the question is, if teaching is a noble profession, if teaching is an important profession, you know, should we be paying them salaries commensurate with the value that of the work that they are doing? So I'm asking you a simple question. Would you recommend to states, as the leader of education in America, that teachers at least make $60,000 a year?
I would certainly recommend to states that teachers be paid what is commensurate with the kinds of jobs that are part of their states. Not all states have the same living costs. Not all states have the same ability to pay teachers. But to attract really good teachers and to keep them, we should definitely pay them commensurate with the job performance that they are undertaking.
Millions of young people, low-income people, are finding it very difficult to afford to go to college, and they're leaving school $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in debt. Pell Grant program provides assistance to over 7 million low-income young people in this country. Can you guarantee to us, if you are made a Secretary of Education, that no student in America will lose their Pell Grant as the department is dismantled?
Certainly, the defunding is not the goal here. The continuation of Pell Grants, I'd actually even like to see an expansion of Pell Grants. I'd like to see short-term certificates for Pell Grants for students who aren't going on to four-year universities, who could have the opportunity to use Pell Grants for skill-based learning.
All right, so what I'm hearing you say is Pell Grant program will continue under your administration.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Cassidy asked you an important question, and that is, do you agree, and let me just once again get your feelings on this, that if there is a movement to abolish the Department of Education, it has to go through the United States Congress?
Yes, it is set up by the United States Congress, and we work with Congress. It clearly cannot be shut down without it.
Good. Thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you. Welcome. First of all, let me say I was very pleased to hear your strong commitment to enforcing the Office of Civil Rights jurisdiction over the many incidences, horrible incidences of anti-Semitism that we've seen on our college campuses. Among the important programs that are administered by the Department of Education are Title I, IDEA, and the TRIO programs, all of which have been high priorities for me. I want to briefly discuss those programs. Title I helps public schools that are serving low-income students. It helps level the playing field in terms of resources compared to more affluent communities. In Maine, 63% of our public schools receive Title I funds. Very important to our state. Second, IDEA, the Disabilities in Education Act, which helps children with special needs. Maine receives more than $65 million to support K through 12 students with special education needs. I would note that that falls far short of the 40% that was promised when the legislation was passed in the 1970s. TRIO programs, which we've discussed, have changed the lives of countless first-generation students who are going to college and come from families with no experience with higher education. I've seen so many success stories as a result of TRIO. So my question for you is, how do we maintain the administration and oversight of these programs if we abolish or substantially reorganize the Department of Education?
Thank you, Senator Collins, and I know how passionate you are about these issues, and I enjoyed meeting with you in your office and talking about these various things, especially I think the TRIO program, which we both agreed was just hit a terrible blow just by regulation when some of the students who were applying, their applications were rejected simply because of spacing on a form.
Right.
And that kind of regulatory control just cannot stand. That is just impossible. The Title I programs that you've been discussed will continue to be appropriated through Congress. Today, they go directly to the State Department of Education and then are distributed to the districts. We're not looking to defund or reduce any of those amounts. IDEA is the same, but might it be better served in a different agency? I'm not sure. It started at HEW, and the concerns for disabilities and health issues with students may very well rest better within an agency that has more oversight of all of those. So I think if I am confirmed to be able to get in and assess programs, how they can have the best oversight possible, how we can really take the bureaucracy out of education and focus on teaching our children to read and to do math and to appreciate our history is certainly my goal and would be my goal as the Secretary of Education.
Thank you. On Monday, the administration announced that the Department of Education was going to terminate 89 contracts from the Institute of Education Sciences. They were worth $881 million, as well as terminating 29 training grants. This week, my office heard from a former teacher from Oakland, Maine, who has developed a high-impact tutoring model, and it's currently being used in 12 schools in Maine alone, and she has one of the grant applications pending to more thoroughly evaluate the impact of this model on the students' outcomes. She's worried that it's now going to be in jeopardy due to these sudden cuts. Considering the poor reading and math scores reported by NAEP, and that unfortunately includes poor scores in my home state, shouldn't the Department of Education continue to collect data and evaluate outcomes rather than halt these activities so that you can help states know what works?
Well, thank you, Senator. And it is my goal, if I am confirmed, to get in and assess these kinds of programs, because I'm not sure yet what the impact of all of those programs are. I know that there are many worthwhile programs that we should keep, but I'm not yet apprised of them. I want to study them. I'd like to get back and talk to you more and to work with you. I look forward to working with this committee and all of Congress to make sure we can deliver for our education.
Thank you. I appreciate your responses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The committee will come to order. Senator Murray.
Thank you, Ms. McMahon. Elon Musk's DOGE staffers have reportedly set up camp at the Department of Education. They've already been given access to highly sensitive student data and have already started holding back money that Congress decided on a bipartisan basis was needed to help our schools and students. We're also hearing, as you know, about an executive order coming any day that will seek to dismantle the Department of Education. These are bipartisan laws. You indicated that you understood that Congress has passed these laws. But a lot of turmoil is happening. You heard it from my colleague just asking that question now. So I want to ask you, if confirmed, do you commit to getting every dollar we have invested in our students and schools out to them?
Well, the appropriated dollars and those monies that are passed by Congress, yes. I have no issue, however, with the fact, and I believe the American people spoke loudly in the election last November to say that they want to look at waste, fraud, and abuse in our government. So DOGE, there are a couple of implants at the Department of Education, as there are with agencies throughout the district, and they're doing an audit.
Right,
you know,
I understand an audit, but when Congress appropriates money, it is the administration's responsibility to put that out as directed by Congress, who has the power of the purse. So what will you do if the president or Elon Musk tells you not to spend money Congress has appropriated to you?
We will certainly expend those dollars that Congress has passed, but I do think it is worthwhile to take a look at the programs before money goes out the door. It's much easier. It is much easier to stop the money as it's going out the door than it is to claw it back.
The process by law is that you look at that, you make recommendations to Congress, and we implement those laws. So, I mean, the question really is, who decides how much federal funding public schools get in Seattle, where it's already been allocated? The school district or Elon Musk or Congress? And I think Congress has been pretty clear that the purse lies here. We pass our appropriations bills. We expect those programs to come. If you have input, if you have programs you have looked at that you believe are not effective, then it is your job to come to us, explain why, and get the support for that. Let me move on. Ms. Mann, I believe that our nation's students, families, and taxpayers do want true accountability. They do want improvement in our schools. Back in 2015, Congress came together in a bipartisan way to replace the No Child Left Behind Act with the new law, Every Student Succeeds Act. That was a bill I was very proud to negotiate with my Republican counterpart on this committee, passed it into law, It gives states more flexibility in using their federal education funds. It eliminated those one-size-fits-all mandates that everyone hated, and it established some really strong federal guardrails to hold states and schools accountable. I believe that the Department of Education must do more to implement that law. Right now, less than 42% of our schools identified for Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI as we call it, had a plan that met all the requirements of that law. And 1 in 5 schools' plans included practices we know are ineffective. National assessment results, as you well know, released a few weeks ago, show that our lowest performing students continue to fall furthest behind. So I want to ask you, what specific actions will you take to implement the ESSA law? I'm not looking for an exhaustive list, but can you name a couple of the requirements that are in that law that you will make sure are implemented?
Well, Senator, thank you, and I would look forward to working with you in the committee, understanding more about the ESSA laws.
Do you know what the requirements are? Do you know about the requirements for targeted support improvement schools or the annual report card requirement? Can you name any of the requirements
Yes,
that are in that?
I have read through ESSA, and I do know it was very interesting. It's how I really got into education in the first place, was when No Child Left Behind was in place.
But there are no requirements that you can tell me right now that you will make sure, as Secretary of Education, you will implement?
No, I want to study it further and get back to you with that, and I'll be happy to do that.
Well, let me ask one last question. As I mentioned, DOGE staff have been given access in the Department of Education to personal information of students and families, like their social security numbers and their driver's license numbers and their date of birth, what college they're enrolled in. I know that the access has been temporarily paused due to litigation, but there is a real potential for that kind of information to be abused, or for students' privacy to be placed in jeopardy if the courts end up ruling against the students. And we know that DOGE could use that highly personal information to then target students and target their families, or cut off access to Pell Grants for students at college that someone perceives opposes maybe President Trump policy. So I want to ask you, do you believe that DOGE employees should have access to private student data?
It is my understanding that DOGE employees have been onboarded as employees of the Department of Education, and therefore they operate under the restraints of utilizing access of information, and they are constrained by that.
That is not our understanding, and I have to tell you,
That's my understanding.
It's deeply concerning that we have DOGE staffers, we don't know who they are, they're not held accountable, getting access to students' private information. I think that should frighten everyone.
Well, again, I'm not there
Thank you,
yet.
Madam Chair.
So I'm not there yet, but it is my understanding that they are onboarded fully
I hope
employees.
if you do get there that you make sure that students' private information is not given to someone who's no idea what they have, or we have no idea how they're using it. Thank you.
Senator Houston.
Thank you. Ms. McMahon, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Look forward to your confirmation, hopefully, and working with you on what is arguably one of the most important issues to the future of our country and to our children. I would just simply ask you if you believe that education is foundational to the opportunity to live your version of the American dream for children. You agree with that?
I certainly do agree with that, and thank you very much, Senator, for that question. Education, I think, is at the very center of our culture. It is the ticket out of poverty for so many students. It is how our children's minds are absolutely cultivated so that they can learn. And I remember listening to Senator Cassidy when he said that every child up until the 3rd grade learns to read, and then after the 3rd grade reads to learn. And if children cannot read at a proficiency level, they cannot continue to learn. They can't then be proficient in school. They can't go forward to higher education. They can't even start a business or do anything. So education, I do believe, is at the very center of what we need to do, and to ensure that we have the best education for our students and that they all have equal access to a quality education.
Thank you. The issue of inequality has come up in this hearing, and I can tell you when I started in my elected career, I was a a green state legislator in the state of Ohio who had this strange notion that if children were trapped in chronically failing schools, that they should have the opportunity to go somewhere else. And that I thought, who could be against that? And I quickly found out, well, there were a lot of people who were against that, powerful people, powerful institutions. And I just believe that we as Americans, we believe that freedom and choice is good. It's part of our DNA. It's good for markets and business, and that monopolies don't work, whether that's big business or big government. And that has been reinforced to me over the course of basically my lifetime that I've worked on this issue. Foundationally or fundamentally, billionaires have choice. Their children have choice. It's children that grow up in poverty that don't have choice. And that is an important element of fixing inequality, because if we say that an education is foundational to living your version of the American dream, yet you don't have the choice to go to a school that serves your needs, we basically have institutionalized a barrier against that opportunity and to have that equality of opportunity. Just share with me how you hope to fix that.
Well, certainly the president, one of his cornerstones relative to education is school choice. He certainly does believe in universal school choice, and we have seen, I think that there are now, I believe the number's 33 states, I might be corrected on that, states that do have school choice. And what we have found that public schools come up, they're competitive. A lot of the concerns relative to school choice, I think the statistics, belie. We have students that are not leaving public schools in hordes and going to other schools, but they have the opportunity. Parents look at their children and say, I want that for my child. My school is failing my child. So if I have the opportunity to have an educational savings account or a voucher program or a scholarship program to get my child maybe to that charter school or to that other public school that is doing better than the one that my child is here because this is where I live, but I know that if I could get my child to that next school, they would be better off. Every parent wants that opportunity for their child.
Thank you. And just quickly, I made some calls to superintendents in my state in Ohio before I came today, and I said, would you prefer to have the money sent directly to you rather than through the federal Department of Education? And do you think you could do a better job if we released you from the rules and regulations and you just said, and they said, yes, tell us what you want us to achieve, we'll achieve it, we'll do it. And I just wanted to share that with you, and that I also want to give you a chance to answer this, that you're not, and President Trump is not talking about cutting any funding for children. You're not talking about cutting funding for disabled children. You're just talking about changing the way that the money gets to these students in schools, and that you're committed to that. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
It is now Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start my questions, just wanted to put some studies in the record. Recent research studies of private school vouchers in Louisiana, Indiana, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. showed that students who used these vouchers performed worse academically than their public school peers. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record those 4 studies that show private school vouchers have a negative impact on student achievement.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. McMahon, I appreciated the opportunity to meet with you last month, and I believe in giving all the president's nominees a fair shake. That's what the people of Wisconsin expect from me, and I look forward to hearing more about your approach to running the Department of Education if confirmed. Mrs. McMahon, since 1972, Title IX has been a critical tool in ensuring that all students are protected from sex-based discrimination in federally funded education programs. We briefly discussed Title IX in our meeting, but I'd like to ask you a series of yes or no questions to get into a little bit more detail here. So yes or no, do you believe that Title IX should be enforced to protect students from sexual harassment and sexual assault?
Yes, I do.
Do you believe that sexual harassment that is severe should be prohibited under Title IX?
I think sexual harassment should be prohibited in any case.
Thank you. Do you believe that sexual harassment that is pervasive should be prohibited by Title IX?
Yes.
Do you believe that harassment that is either severe or pervasive should be prohibited under Title IX?
I don't believe there should be any acceptance of sexual harassment, Senator.
Great. Because I'm glad you actually agree with President Trump's efforts during his first term to narrow what qualifies as sexual harassment under Title IX. His guidance said that sexual harassment had to be severe and pervasive. And I hope that you will take your position and press for that to be the law. But right now, the Title IX is limited to sexual harassment that is severe and pervasive, not severe or pervasive. Yes or no, if an assault occurs between two students, but it happens off campus, do you think the school should have the ability to investigate that matter?
I think the school should investigate that matter, and I believe under the regulations today, and I could be corrected on that, that they are obligated to investigate.
Okay, and do you believe that the school then, after investigation, should have the ability to take actions regarding an incident that occurs off campus?
Yes, I think the school should be required to take those actions and to investigate and to notify the parties that are involved, and that so that both sides of the equation can have due process.
I appreciate your answer. It is not entirely clear at this matter, at this time, that the incidents would not only be investigated, but adjudicated as to the school's adjudication rules. And the problem with that, as I'm sure you're well aware, is that you would have the potential of a victim of sexual assault facing the potential of attending class with their perpetrator. You know, despite how much this administration likes to talk about protecting women and girls, the actions have not matched the rhetoric. And so I think instead of actually protecting women and girls, this administration is not making school a safer place for anyone, while using this topic as a way to fearmonger and demonize others. Mrs. McMahon, you have been named in a lawsuit which alleges that you and your husband allowed for systemic and pervasive abuse of underage children to persist in your business for years. It is an ongoing lawsuit, and it alleges that you rehired a known sexual predator, and you felt it was sufficient to simply direct him to steer clear of children. If confirmed, you will be responsible with overseeing the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, charged with ensuring equal access to education through vigorous enforcement of civil rights laws. I am so concerned about whether sexual assault survivors on campus can trust you to support them.
Thank you, Senator. They certainly can trust me to support them. I have a granddaughter that is now in college. I have two grandsons who are in college. And I have a deep commitment of understanding of how I would feel if any of them were involved in sexual harassment or accused of sexual harassment. You have my absolute commitment that I will uphold and protect those investigations to make sure that those students are treated fairly on both sides.
Mrs. McMahon, we met shortly after a shooting at...
You're a minute over.
Oh. I will submit this question for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. McMahon, thanks for being here today, and thanks for wanting to take on this monumental task. You know, I'm a football coach. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a business guy. I taught high school and worked my way up for 40 years. This country gives you one thing, and it's what I taught my kids when I coached. This country doesn't owe you anything but an opportunity. And that's the reason this country is the greatest country on the face of the earth. Now, when you lose that opportunity, and I've lost many times, I've got my tail back up and gone again. But that's where you learn it, through education. I've been to every state in this country recruiting, going through high schools except for Alaska in my 40 years. In my 40 years of coaching and going into high school, there's not been a bigger disappointment than our education system. I've seen it decline for 40 years. It's gotten worse. You're going to have the task of trying to bring it back. It's going to be hard to do because you're going to be fought from every side. This is not Democrat, Republican, black, white. It's not. It's an American problem. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars of my budget when I coach and bringing kids in. After I tested them, they couldn't read past the 6th grade and reading level, but they had 3.5 GPAs when they came to my university. We're failing. It is a disaster. If you can't read, you can't learn. And that's one of the first things that we got to get back to, is teaching our kids to read. We got a lot of teachers that don't teach reading like you and I learned. It's different. We have all this nonsensical teaching of what we call Common Core of math. I still ain't figured that out. But thanks for wanting to take this on, because there's a lot of obstacles going to be in your way. And so don't be afraid to make changes. We've had a K through 12 system for years. It's a failure. It is an absolute failure. Let's teach our kids. That's the only chance they got to survive in this world, which is going to be very, very competitive. Now, we have things that get in our way. And what's deterring our kids nowadays? That thing right there. I had problems coaching with it. Enemy number one when I told them, put that damn phone up. Don't bring it to my dressing room, because I want you to listen and learn, not be on there listening to music and read the nonsense you see on there. So you got a lot of obstacles. The one thing I think we need to do is just look at K through 12 and what do we do? How do we get better? I'm all for workforce development in the last 2 years of high school, teaching kids to learn to use their hands. And what's your thoughts on that, about work in high school? I'm not talking about past high, I'm talking about the last couple of years.
Well, thank you, Senator. I think when you and I met in your office, and I appreciated that time, I discussed with you that I probably dated myself by saying that when I was in high school, in your senior year in high school, you could take a vocational program, which meant that you went to school the first part of the day. The second part of the day, you could have a job. You could be learning a skill or a trade, and those credits would count towards your education. I think we need to get back to more of that. We are not teaching skill-based learning in our schools anymore. And I think we have to look at our entire education system and say, you know, four-year college is not for everyone. For those particular jobs that require, you know, doctors, lawyers, engineers, that require 4 years, then I think...
Ms. McMahon, please suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the room.
I don't think she knows how to read or
Again,
listen.
members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts its business. With that, Ms. McMahon, please resume.
Thank you. So I think we do have to get back to teaching basics, you know, in school K through 12, but to continue on to what we were talking about, we don't have enough skill-based learning. We don't have enough internships or apprenticeship programs. I'd also like to see, you know, more dual credits in our high schools, our junior and senior years, that would count towards community colleges or other institutes that would get students through college faster, if in fact that is the plan that they are going to take. So we have so much that we can do to help our students get prepared to have a good income and a good livelihood. And if they can graduate from high school with some skill-based already, they can even start a business of their own. They can decide at that particular point, I want to put more money towards my own education, but in the meantime, I am prepared to make a living. But I think we have to look at education and say our vocational and skill-based training is not a default education. It can be something, it can be front and center so that students who are inclined to go in that direction actually should be encouraged to do that. It's not one size fits all.
I would hope, too, that you would look, my time's almost up, would look at the number of teachers we have now as compared to administrators. We need teachers. We don't need people up sitting in the office with their feet propped up. We need people in the classroom teaching these kids, hold them accountable, and put more money in the teachers and less money in administrators. I think we'd be a heck of a lot better off. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll note for the record that many of the losses Coach Tuberville suffered were at the hands of LSU. But we Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McMahon, good to see you. You and I have spent a lot of time over the years, and I appreciate your willingness to sit before the committee and answer some really important questions. I want to talk to you about an executive order that the Trump administration issued that commands agencies, including the Department of Education, to eliminate grants to organizations and entities that support DEI programs and activities. As you know, this has a lot of schools all across the country scrambling because they have no idea what that means. They don't know because the order doesn't define DEI as to whether they are in compliance or out of compliance and whether they are going to have their federal grants compromised. How does a school know whether it's running a DEI program or not?
Well, certainly, and thank you, Senator, and it is good to see you again outside of the state of Connecticut, where we run into each other. DEI, I think, has been, it's a program that's tough. It was put in place ostensibly for more diversity, for equity and inclusion, and I think what we're seeing is that it's having an opposite effect. We are getting back to more segregating of our schools instead of having more inclusion in our schools. When there are DEI programs that say that Black students need separate graduation ceremonies or Hispanics need separate ceremonies, we are not achieving what we wanted to achieve with inclusion.
Let me give you an example then. So this order applies to Department of Defense schools, and those schools have canceled all programming around Black History Month. So if a school in Connecticut celebrates Martin Luther King Day and has a series of events and programming teaching about Black history, are they in violation of a policy that says schools should stop running DEI programs?
Not in my view. That is clearly not the case. The celebration of Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month should be celebrated throughout all of our schools. I believe that Martin Luther King was one of the strongest proponents of making sure that we look at all of our populations when he said that, he would hope that his children wouldn't be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And I think that is the fundamental basis that we should celebrate Black History Month.
West Point has closed down all ethnic clubs, so the Society of Black Engineers no longer can meet because they believe that to be in compliance with this order, they cannot have groups structured around ethnic or racial affiliations. Would schools, would public schools be in violation of this order? Would they risk funding if they had clubs that students could belong to based on their racial or ethnic identity?
Well, I certainly today don't want to address, hypothetical situations. I would like, once I'm confirmed, to get in and assess these programs, look at what has been covered.
Is that a pretty easy one? I mean, you're saying that it's a possibility that if a school has a club for Vietnamese American students or Black students where they meet after school, that they could be potentially in jeopardy of receiving federal funding?
Again, I would like to fully order is and what those clubs are doing.
That's pretty chilling. I think schools all around the country are going to hear that. What about educational programming centered around specific ethnic and racial experiences? My son is in a public school. He takes a class called African American History. If you're running an African American history class, Could you perhaps be in violation of this court order, of this executive order?
I'm not quite certain, and I'd like to look into it further and get back to you on that.
So there's a possibility, you're saying, that public schools that run African-American history classes, right? This is a class that has been taught in public schools for decades, could lose federal funding if they continue to teach African-American history.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I would like to take a look at these programs and fully understand the breadth of the executive order and get back to you on that.
I think you're going to have a lot of educators and a lot of principals and administrators scrambling right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Ms. McMahon.
Thank you.
Good to have a conversation with you. You have had the privilege, I know, to come to Alaska during your tenure at the SBA. You came north, so I know that you have had an opportunity to understand some of the challenges that we face with basically our geography. And I wanted to talk a little bit this morning about our public schools. There's a lot of discussion, and I listened carefully to your comments to Senator Husted about school choice. We would all love to have the benefits of greater school choice. In the Anchorage public school system, my sons were able to attend a magnet school that was focused on an immersion program for Spanish-speaking immersion program. It was a great program for them. I go to the vast majority of my communities across the state, and there is no choice. It is a small village. It may have 500 people, it may have 1,000 people, but you have one school. And it's not as if there is an opportunity to go to another school because 82% of these communities are not connected by a road. So if you wanted to go to another school, you would have to figure out how you fly to another village, another population center. So for me, investment in our public education system is really what I have been focused on. I had an opportunity to speak before our Alaska Association of School Boards just recently and received a standing ovation when I said public funds for public schools. Pretty simple. And so I want to ask you whether you believe it is your primary role and responsibility as Secretary to support and strengthen our nation's public schools.
I absolutely do believe that our public schools are the bedrock of our education. You know, they go back, to the very founding of our country. I think in the first Constitution, there were actually sectors of each state that were set aside for the specific goal of public education. And so education is certainly understood to be so vital and so important to what we're doing. I understand the schools in Alaska. I think when I was in your office, we were talking about the school that I visited in Kwethluk, which is a very, very small island. And this school was being funded by SBA. This was when I was at SBA. And because we were looking at the fact that there was no real community center and no glue holding the community together, and that children, and especially in K through 12, often dropped out of school because they didn't see the need or the necessity to continue with education, and they would often wind up, on the streets or not having jobs. I've not checked back with that school to see how it was going, but I saw the commitment of that community to invest and to make sure that the best education, and this was a state-of-the-art school built on this island. And when I pulled up in the boat in that village, there were mothers in a smoking hut that were cutting salmon to get ready for the winter. And on the other side, there was this incredibly modern school that was being built. And I think we have to invest our public education, if we can use public funds to help with tutoring in those issues and those instances where you don't have a choice to go to another school.
And you quite possibly saw one of the very few examples of good infrastructure. And as we know, it's not just giving a good building, it is making sure that you have teachers that are able to stay in a village that lacks a lot of resources, a lot of support. I want to pivot from that, but I do want to underscore the emphasis on education equity across America, including in the most rural of areas. Because I listen to a lot of the comments around here, and it works if you're in a city. But it doesn't work in my communities, and I have an obligation to them. I want to ask you about local control here real quickly. This has been something that as Republicans we've been talking about. It's local control, local control, local control. We've got a lot of folks that are suggesting that now the public school curriculum should not include lessons in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Want to focus on other things. I understand that. But we have ESSA, the Elementary Secondary Education Act. We included a number of provisions that were very, very specific in prohibiting any federal employee from mandating, directing, or controlling a state's school districts or schools' instructional content, academic standards and assessments, curricula, or program of instruction. So you may be in a situation where, as secretary, you may not condition the award of a grant on a school agreeing not to teach DEI subjects. You may be in a position where you can't mandate that they teach the principles of the U.S. Constitution. You may be in a position where you are not able to prohibit teachers from discussing LGBTQ issues with students. ESSA is very clear, and again, it was something that we wanted to promote as Republicans with the focus on local control. So how do you balance what you have shared here before the committee with the requirements of the law that says the federal government is not the school board here, if you will, for our nation's schools?
Thank you, Senator. And I believe, I don't remember which of the senators this morning, well, actually, I think it was Senator Scott, who said the Department of Education does not actually educate any child. It is to be handled at the local level. And I understand under ESSA there were lots of regulations put in place to return, and the goal was to return education to the states, which is clearly the president's role. But Senator, I must say, we have failed in our mission. We are not delivering the kind of education that we need to deliver to our children. I believe, as does the president, the best education is closest to the child, that parents and the school officials who understand the needs of those children in those communities can best direct the education in those states, and states will be competitive. Governors have put in programs, for school choice, et cetera, and looking, and what kind of results, are we seeing? I was heartened by the state of Louisiana in the recent NAEP scores that came out, that they had brought up their reading and their math scores by a considerable percentage because they went back to basics. They were teaching children to read and write and do arithmetic. And I think I heard superintendent of the Louisiana school say that he used everything from flashcards to AI to make sure that the students were getting the basics in education. And that's what we have to get back to.
It sounds like you're suggesting we need to
Senator
amend or change ESSA.
Senator Murkowski, I was asleep at the wheel. You're like way over. Senator Kane.
I would never describe you as asleep at the wheel, Mr. Chairman. But thank you, Ms. McMahon. I enjoyed the visit we had in our office, especially our discussion about career and technical education. That's a huge passion of mine. I want to ask you about public service loan forgiveness. The federal public service loan forgiveness program was put in place during the Bush administration, bipartisan Congress. It's been part of law since 2007. What is your position on public service loan forgiveness program?
Well, certainly, and thank you very much. And it was good to visit with you in your office, Senator. Clearly, there are programs that have already been passed by Congress that do, in fact, grant loan forgiveness for public service. Our first responders, military, et cetera. And we certainly should honor those programs. And if we want stronger or more programs for loan forgiveness, then I think Congress should pass those programs and then we would implement it.
So your commitment is, should you be confirmed, you will fully implement existing public service loan forgiveness programs that have been passed by Congress?
Those that have been passed by Congress, yes, that's the law.
That's very important because during the first Trump administration, Secretary DeVos and the Department of Education slow-walked approvals of public service loan forgiveness. 7,000 people over the course of 4 years were granted forgiveness under the programs. It was about a 3% acceptance rate of fully qualified applicants for public service loan forgiveness. During the Biden administration, more than 1 million applicants were approved for forgiveness, as was appropriate given the congressional directive, and more than 33,000 Virginia public servants were given public service loan forgiveness. If the DOGE brothers or somebody else tells you we don't like these programs and we don't want you to implement them, I can count on you to stand up and fully implement them to benefit those who are entitled to the benefit by the congressional statute.
Yes, because that's the law.
Thank you for that. If there's no Department of Education, who will enforce the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act?
Well, I think that is something that I would very much like to understand more and look into. I mean, when IDEA was originally set up, it was under HEW, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. After the Department of Education was established in 1980, it shifted over there. I'm not sure that it's not better served in HHS, but I don't know. I haven't yet been able to be in, and if I'm confirmed, it is of high priority to make sure that the students who are receiving disability loans, disability funding, that is not impacted. It is incredibly important that those programs continue to be funded.
My Virginia parents who have children with disabilities are highly, highly worried right now about the elimination of the Department of Education. Because the IDEA is about funding, and I know you've talked about that already, but it's also about enforcement. You would agree with me that there has to be vigorous enforcement of the requirements of IDEA.
Well, I certainly agree that we want to make sure that that funding gets to those students, and it's not defunding.
I'm not asking about funding. I'm asking about enforcement of the
yes,
provisions.
the programs have to have accountability. All the programs do.
What role do you think the federal government should play in addressing the national teacher shortage?
Well, boy, that is a really critical issue, that we're not attracting and keeping our teachers. One thing I think we need to make sure of, and I'm not sure it's a federal government policy, because that really should be at the state level. How are we educating and teaching and training our teachers? How are we making sure that they have the supplies that they need in their classrooms? We need to make sure that the funding is proper in the states so that they can support teachers.
Let me say a word about funding. Just in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration, here's what they have done with respect to the teacher shortage. They've canceled grants going to jurisdictions, including jurisdictions in Virginia, on teacher training programs that have been designed to reduce teacher shortages. There's also a national priority that I'm sure you're familiar with, national board certification for teachers. It's kind of giving teachers the ability to sort of up their professional credentials, and often local governments and occasionally the federal government will give an incentive, a financial incentive for upping your credentials. The Trump administration canceled the grant that goes to the organization that administers national teacher certification. I get it that the primary responsibility for dealing with teacher shortages is at the state and local level. But the federal government has played an important role in this, and there are important ongoing initiatives to help states deal with it that this administration is canceling, suggesting that they don't really prioritize having highly qualified teachers standing up in front of every classroom. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McMahon, thank you for being here. Nice to see you again. Let me just say this. The last 4 years have been, in many ways, absolutely hellacious for students on our college campuses. You had the last administration which issued federal rules, binding regulations that required our college campuses to put biological men into women's locker rooms. You've had multiple universities claiming the mandate, claiming the cover of the Biden administration, forcing women to accept biological men in women's sports. And so you've seen young woman after young woman denied basic safety in their changing facilities, for heaven's sake, basic safety in their dorm rooms, not able to play college sports. Now, I'm delighted that a federal court finally struck down this Biden administration rule back in January, just over a month ago. And President Trump issued a clear, strong, unequivocal executive order saying that Title IX will be enforced according to its terms, which is Title IX protects women's sports, it protects women on college campuses, no more men in women's locker rooms. This is a huge victory for common sense and the rule of law. My question to you is this: a number of universities, including some very prominent ones that love to call themselves elite, have said they're not going to follow that executive order. They're going to keep having men in women's locker rooms. They're going to try to get men in women's sports. What can be done to ensure that these colleges comply with the law and that women are safe on campus and that women are able to play sports without men interfering?
Well, certainly, I agree with you that I was very happy to see that those restrictions on Title IX vacated, so that we are really back to what Title IX was originally established to do, and that was to protect sexual discrimination. And women should feel safe in their locker rooms. They should feel safe in their spaces. They shouldn't have to be exposed to men undressing in front of them. I think I heard one person the other day say, well, the guys just should hold the shower curtain in front of them so that they aren't exposing themselves. I mean, really, that's just not what we should be doing. We want to make sure that Title IX, which is the law, is enforced. And we need to uphold that.
Will you investigate those universities that are not complying with Title IX, that are not complying with the president's executive order? These universities are absolutely getting federal funds from this department, the department that you're going to run if and when you are confirmed, and I believe you will be. Will you investigate those universities and give them an ultimatum? Either they need to comply with the law, they need to follow the law of Title IX, they need to follow the rules issued by this administration, your department, or no federal funding. I mean, will you make sure that that the law is enforced?
Yes, we will make sure the law is enforced.
Very good. Let me ask you about...
The senator will suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the hearing room. Members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts its business. The senator will resume.
Don't worry, Ms. McMahon, it's me, it's not you. It's all right. That effect. Let me ask you about something else that's happened on our campuses in the last 4 years, the wave of anti-Semitism that we've seen, particularly after October 7th with the attacks on Israel. Shameful attacks on Jewish students, Jewish American students, Jewish students from overseas. We have seen the most unbelievable pro-terrorist propaganda. And again, these universities taking federal money, getting federal funds, not protecting Jewish students, permitting encampments, permitting violence in some instances, attacks on students on their campuses. The president has issued an executive order on January the 29th on measures to combat anti-Semitism, and he directed the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to open Title VI investigations into a number of universities, including Columbia, Berkeley, Northwestern. Will you enforce the law, Title VI to the hilt, and will you make sure that Jewish Americans are safe on our campuses, for heaven's sake, and these crazy students who are committing crimes, breaking windows, smashing into buildings, trapping Jewish students in libraries? Will you make sure that this stops on our college campuses that are getting all of this federal tax money?
Absolutely, or face defunding of their monies.
Very good. And let me ask you about something else. For students who have come to this country on a student visa, and as you know, that's a lot of people on our college campuses. For students who are here on a student visa, who have threatened their fellow students, threatened Jewish students, who have supported terrorist organizations, who have broken our law by trespassing or vandalism or acts of violence against Jewish students, will you see that those students, that their visas are revoked and they are sent home and they're not allowed to stay on our campuses under cover of our laws, committing crimes and threatening our own students? Will you return some common sense to our campuses in this way?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from their hearing room. I'm not sure it's going to matter, but I'm going to remind members of the audience that disruptions are not to be permitted while the committee conducts its business. Please show people the regard you would have them show yourself if you're in this role. It may seem trite, but the rudeness of people who are trying to squelch others as they're trying to communicate in an incredibly public forum is just amazing, amazingly bad. With that editorial comment, I then go to Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Ms. McMahon. It was good to meet with you in my office a little bit ago. And I've been starting these hearings with a question I never thought I'd have to ask, and I'll cut to the chase with you because you've said several times that you will uphold the law, so I assume that if the President of the United States gives you a directive that breaks the law, you will instead do what you are legally required to do rather than his instruction.
The President will not ask me to do anything that is against the law.
Well, the last month has told us that it is quite likely he may, but I am going to take you at your word that you will enforce the law because you've said it several times today. 3 weeks ago, the President unilaterally cut all federal grants by issuing an indefinite freeze. That's an unconstitutional and, yes, illegal action that was stopped by federal courts, to my previous point. Subsequent reporting indicates that the President is also planning to eliminate the Department of Education, the department that you're interviewing today to lead. And there's this little bit of, I don't know, the whole hearing right now feels kind of surreal to me. It's almost like we're being subjected to a very elegant gaslighting here, because Senator Hawley just asked you, and you talked about the need to enforce protections for Jewish students on college campuses, but the very department where the enforcement would take place is the Department of Education, and he wants to eliminate it, and you say you will work with him to do that. Similarly, you've talked about the importance of apprenticeships and other kinds of career and technical education, really important. There's bipartisan support for that here. The Republicans are in charge. We have bipartisan bill after bipartisan bill. We could go right forward with it, but there's this discussion as if we haven't made any progress on that, and there's somehow a partisan divide about that. So I'd encourage you to look into that. But I want to talk a little bit about why the Department of Education is so important. It plays a critical role in making sure that students, regardless of their zip code, race, gender, disability, or family circumstance, have access to a quality public education. It was established because Congress recognized that the country has a compelling interest in ensuring that all of our kids become self-sufficient members of our workforce and our civil society. New Hampshire schools rely on federal funding of about $2,000 per student to provide that public education. What would you say to parents in my state who are concerned about the President's attempt to cut all federal funding to New Hampshire and to eliminate the Department of Education? Are you telling parents that their children should lose access to special education services, for example, or lose access to trained teachers or school nurses?
Well, thank you, Senator, very much. Let me just object to one point, and that is that, the residents in the state of New Hampshire should not be concerned that federal funding is going to be removed from their schools. How they get that federal funding may change.
My time is limited. What department do you suggest would then administer that funding?
Which funding?
The special education funding.
Special education, I think it could very well go back to HHS, where it started.
All right, so I just want to be clear, you're going to put special education in the hands of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, I want to talk about IDEA a little bit more. I want to turn to a specific issue regarding the President's plan to eliminate the Department of Education. What does the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act promise?
It promises that we're going to take care of these students, that they're going to be provided with assistance that they have in the schoolrooms, the technology that they need, the assistance. And you and I talked a little bit about that with your own child.
IDEA guarantees children with disabilities a free, appropriate education. What is the federal investment promise to states under IDEA? What's it supposed to be?
In terms of dollar amounts?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
The federal government committed back in 1975 when it passed IDEA to pay 40% of the average per pupil expenditure for special education. You know what what the federal government actually does?
I think it's around 14 to 18% at this point.
It's about 15%.
But it's an appropriated amount from Congress, though, and so Congress needs to appropriate those dollars to spend.
That's right, but the President of the United States is proposing, and the Republicans in Congress are proposing massive tax cuts for billionaires, and they're trying to pay for it by massive cuts to education and other services. And just so you know, New Hampshire would lose $60 million in IDEA funding if IDEA were eliminated. My time is almost up. I'm just going to say this. The reason the Department of Education came about in about 1975, IDEA was passed in 1975. 1979 was the department. And Mr. Chair, I'll take just a second here. But people need to understand, people like my son, we talked about him. Before IDEA, before the Department of Education existed, state and local schools did not educate these kids. They barred them from the classrooms. These kids were institutionalized and abused. There is a reason that a Department of Education and IDEA exists, and it is because educating kids with disabilities can be really hard. And it takes the national commitment to get it done. And that's why so many people are so concerned about this proposal to eliminate the department, because they think kids will once again be shoved aside, and especially kids with disabilities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Thank you, sir. One of the things that you and I had an opportunity to talk about a number of months ago, I actually believe that competition does, in fact, increase the production as well as improve the outcome. Typically, whether it's private sector, frankly, public education, I think competition is a key component to making things better and typically cheaper. I think charter schools is a classic example of that. Typically speaking, some of the most successful schools in the country, think about Success Academies in New York City, where you have 83% minorities who are consistently ranked in the top 5 high schools in the state because all kids have high potential of learning. I think that we need to make sure that every parent has choice so that the kids have the best chance at life. By the way, I think that public schools are part of school choice from my perspective. Public schools, private schools, charter schools, virtual schools, homeschool. I want the parents to make that choice because they care the most about their kids. I know some people think it's the teachers' unions. I think it's the parents. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm sorry.
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. I agree that competition is, I think, very key. When I first started to take a look at education, I was reading the Sunday morning paper in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I saw that public schools in Greenwich, Connecticut were not meeting the levels of No Child Left Behind. And I couldn't understand that. One of the richest communities in the country, how could there be this kind of achievement gap between students, from lower income areas to upper income areas? And so I tried to meet with the superintendent to talk about that article. I couldn't meet with her. I eventually talked to the governor. And the governor said to me, if you're really interested, let me introduce you to some people. And she did. And I started talking to the folks who were developing charter schools in Connecticut, a woman named Daisha Toll, and I visited those schools, and I saw how much better those children were performing. They were rapidly coming up to grade level reading and doing math. They were teaching differently. And I thought, this is a real opportunity. This was a charter school, which is a public school.
Yes.
And in the state of Connecticut, it's not fully funded. The facility is not provided. And so it's a public-private partnership to make sure that these schools are offering choice and competitiveness. So we saw it was clear evidence how those schools provided an opportunity for students to succeed.
Awesome. You only have 2 minutes left. That was quick. Maybe I have as much time as I want. I'll be the chair for a few minutes. It's great. Oh, my goodness gracious. Never mind. I didn't see that hammer you had there. So back in 2017, I started working on creating a definition in higher education for anti-Semitism. I thought then that we were seeing a little uptick, and having been raised in the Deep South, I'm familiar with discrimination and the challenges that come with, unfortunately, the color of people's skin and or the religious beliefs. And if you look at the level of hate that we've seen recently on college campuses towards our Jewish students, I find it disgusting, frankly. I hope that you will commit to investigating reports of anti-Semitism to the full extent of the law, especially on college campuses around this country.
Yes, absolutely. There should be no discrimination of any form. But, you know, I fully believe that there should be First Amendment protection for discourse and for freedom of speech. But when you become involved in activities that are actually endangering the students that are on campus, then that is not what should happen. And those schools that accept federal funding that allow that to happen should face defunding.
Thank you. And my last question, I know that many of us on my side of the aisle think that DEI is about power more than it is about anything else. I think diversity actually is very healthy for our country. It is the backbone and the strength of our country. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is a political movement that has very little to do with the advancement of people based on the merit, based on what they have to offer, and more to do with about gaining power and political position. President Trump and I worked a lot on HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. He was able to take that funding to the highest level in the history of the country. He was the first president and the only president to make that funding permanent. There's no doubt that our country still struggles with the issue of race, but one of the shining examples of a merit-based system that helps those who do not have see the perspective that the American dream is for them. I hope that you will commit to continuing the efforts of President Trump on supporting historically black colleges and universities.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I met with the president of Howard University a week ago, and we sat and talked through a lot of the different programs that are offered there. And I was very impressed, and I understand that I believe that I'm an honorary Board of Regent member. That may not be the right description by virtue of if I am confirmed as the Secretary of Education, and I look forward to continuing those programs.
And with my last 5 minutes.
Make it fast.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Senator Scott. I see.
We're interrupting this hearing for breaking news. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to become the next Health Secretary of the United States. He just secured enough Senate votes to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. President Trump nominated Kennedy soon after entering office, but the nomination faced a lot of criticism. During confirmation hearings, senators asked Kennedy about his alleged skepticism against vaccines, among other things. But Kennedy also faced a lot of support, especially from people who voted for Trump during the general election. Kennedy says he's going to prioritize combating chronic disease, which he believes is the result of an unhealthy diet and food additives in food. According to Kennedy, health agencies in the past have not spent enough time trying to figure out the root cause of illness, such as diet. And Education Secretary nominee Linda McMahon is the next cabinet pick of President Trump's to face a showdown with lawmakers. And the first he has told to put yourself out of job. We're going to resume that hearing.
Goal of ensuring that all students are able to be prioritized. I shared my concerns about the call to abolish the department. I am particularly concerned, as a former cabinet secretary myself, cabinet secretaries do have the influence, the power, the responsibility to share what is good, what is bad, what is wrong. And so I understand waiting until you get into a position to figure some things out, but there are core basic things like, do we have the confusion that people have over this executive order on diversity? They are scared. The fact that school kids are afraid to come to school, maybe because of their status, we're hearing all kinds of stories, and that's why this hearing is so important. That's why this position is so important. And I'm just a little confused because part of the reason why it was created was because in HEW, children were buried into these big departments. Why do you think that a department that is focused and that really is dealing with children, whether it's civil rights, disability, providing the checks and balances, why do you think that it is better to stick the functions of dealing with children with disabilities in a huge department that will not have the same priority?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. The bottom line is because it's not working. Department of Education was set up in 1980, and since that time we have spent almost $1 trillion, and we have watched our performance scores continue to go down. I do believe that it is a responsibility to make sure that our children do have equal access to excellent education. I think that that is best handled at the state level, closest to the states, working with state administrators, teachers, parents, who should have input into their curriculum.
I have only 2 minutes, and I just want to follow up. Do you believe that any school benefiting from taxpayer dollars should be required to follow federal civil rights laws?
Schools should be required to follow the laws.
Anybody getting taxpayer dollars. And so that's good. So private schools should not be able to turn away a student with a disability or a student based on their religion or their ethnicity or race.
Well, private schools aren't taking federal dollars.
But I'm saying,
so they have the ability to say that if they do not believe that they
receive them,
well, if they believe that they cannot best serve that student and they're not taking federal dollars, then they have the right not to accept that student.
But I'm speaking specifically when we talk about, there's a lot of conversation about vouchers. If private schools take federal dollars, can they turn away a child based on a disability or religion or race?
Well, I think that there are also some public schools who are saying that they don't have the...
Really just a yes or no?
No, it's not. It really isn't.
For me, if you want to follow up, because I'm kind of running out of time.
Okay, I'd be happy to follow, and I'd look forward to following up with you to discuss that. Thank you very much.
Okay, because this is one of the big concerns that we hear about. Also, I believe that as a country, as I said, we've benefited from checks and balances. It's a hallmark. If you're concerned, how would you defend the rights of all students if state and local governments are unable or won't address violations of students' civil rights? For example, how will you intervene if a student is being bullied or harassed on the basis of race or disability?
Well, certainly civil rights, are the rights of everyone. And so we want to make sure that our schools are enforcing. The bullying shouldn't happen anywhere. No child should be made to feel uncomfortable. So it is, but the Department of Education does not control that from Washington.
Would you put this in the department? When we talked, you mentioned the Department of Justice. Would you move this to the Department of Justice?
Well, one of the things that we talked about, as I said this morning, that I think there may be more appropriate places that maybe the Department OCR that is currently in the Department of Education is better served in the Department of Justice, where they have civil rights attorneys as well. But I don't know those things yet. If I'm confirmed, I look forward to getting in and really digesting and understanding where all of these particular aspects need to fit to best serve our students. That's the goal. It's to protect our students.
I look forward to following up. You can understand there is a lot of distrust based on people's motivations in just the past few weeks. I think that's why you're seeing all of what you've seen in this audience today in terms of participation of the folks here. This is important. Our students are important, as you know. And so I really hope that this administration and that you will recognize that there are students, there are teachers, there are parents that need the support and the help. And we hope that you will continue as well with your support of HBCUs.
Thank you,
I yield
Senator.
back. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Senator
so much. Good morning, Ms. McMahon. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you, too.
You bet. Ms. McMahon, when I speak to youth, I typically talk about the 3 pillars of my life: faith, family, and education. And thanks to a strong faith, a loving family, and the public educators in my life, I was a first-generation college kid who got to live my American dream and become a physician and practice in rural medicine. So this education thing is so important to all of us on both sides of the dais. I raised 4 kids in public schools. And unfortunately, I've seen the deterioration of the education system. And again, we have the most incredible teachers and coaches back home, and I'm grateful for all of them. But I think we'd all agree we're going the wrong direction. Just really big picture, what would be your top priorities? How do we change the ship's direction?
Well, certainly the president has given a very clear directive that he would like to look in totality at the Department of Education and believes that the bureaucracy of it should be closed, that we should return education to our states, that the best education is that closest to the kids, and that we should work with our local schools, with our superintendents, with our parents, to make sure that the education that our students are getting are the ones that is best for them. It's not one-size-fits-all education policy throughout the country. Governors have taken great strides in putting in implementing school choice, making sure that schools have the funding that they need. And we've seen public education in those states actually improve. There have been studies to show that. And so I'm very hopeful that we will get back to the basics of education so that our children can read when they leave 3rd grade, and that 8th grade students can do math and reading proficiency. Today, only 1/3 of high school students graduating can read proficiently. That means 2/3 can't. We are failing our students, our Department of Education, and what we are doing today is not working, and we need to change it.
Thank you. Ms. McMahon, should biological boys, be allowed to compete against girls in sports?
I do not believe that biological boys should be able to compete against girls in sports. And I think now that they certainly not only have the people spoken, because that was something that President Trump ran very hard on, but also the court has spoken.
Ms. McMahon, I feel like there's that anti-Semitism has become endemic in our universities. Would you be open to some type of an anti-Semitism commission to evaluate the progress of the universities on this issue?
Yes, I would, and I'd look forward to perhaps working with you or other members of the committee on such a commission.
Okay. Let's talk about workforce Pell Grants for a second. I mean, we can't keep doing what we're doing. The average starting salary for graduates from our community colleges and technical colleges back home is higher than our 4-year universities, and their debt is close to zero, if not zero as well. What would you speak to what do you feel about more flexibility of Pell Grants?
Oh, I certainly would like to see workforce Pell Grants, and it goes through various stages of getting passed, but I definitely think that workforce Pell Grants are something that could stimulate our economy, provide opportunity for those who want to participate in skilled-based learning, to have the opportunity if we'd have short-term certificates of Pell Grants that would get those students into the workplace faster if they want to be electricians, HVAC developers.
And apprenticeships as well?
And apprenticeships and internships, all of that. Well. In fact, in the first Trump administration, I was part of, with SBA and working with the Department of Labor, of making sure that there were more apprenticeship programs across the country, because those are very, very vital to the growth of not only our economy, but our businesses in general.
Thank you, Ms. McMahon. I appreciate your answers and look forward to supporting you. Again, education is so important to all of us. To live that American dream, we need a strong education system. I know you're committed to that as well. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. McMahon, for your public service and for coming back and going through all this. Again, I thought when you were talking to Senator Blunt Rochester, your comment that bullying shouldn't happen anywhere is true, is absolutely true. It shouldn't happen in schools. It shouldn't happen in homes. It shouldn't happen in government. And I'm not going to go over, I agree on the things so much you've covered, anti-Semitism and making sure that there's great clarity around that. I want to talk a little bit about history and the teaching of history. I used to talk about topophilia, which means love of place. And I believe it's a basic building block of economic development of people's affection for a place. And that affection comes largely through the teaching of the history of that part of your state or your county, however that gets broken down. But I think teaching every part of our history is important. Colorado, some of the worst parts of our history, Governor Ralph Carr, a Republican governor who's one of the few Western governors who, when we were putting large detention facilities together for Japanese Americans during at the beginning of World War II, he said, not only we're not going to support that, but any Japanese Americans who want to come.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to become the next Health Secretary of the United States. He just secured enough Senate votes to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. President Trump nominated Kennedy soon after entering office, but the nomination faced a lot of criticism. During confirmation hearings, senators asked Kennedy about his alleged skepticism against vaccines, among other things. But Kennedy also faced a lot of support, especially from people who voted for Trump during the general election. Kennedy says he'll prioritize combating chronic disease, which he believes is the result of an unhealthy diet and additives in food. According to Kennedy, health agencies in the past have not spent enough time trying to figure out the root cause of illness, such as diet. And the Senate Judiciary Committee has voted today to advance Kash Patel's nomination to lead the FBI. Lawmakers voted 12-10 along party lines. Patel is likely to be considered by the full Senate as early as next week. Democratic senators delayed Patel's vote last month after his first confirmation hearing. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said Democrats are trying to get him to testify again after he already testified for 5 hours, submitted thousands of documents, and wrote 150 pages in response to lawmakers' questions. Senator Dick Durbin accused Patel of directing a purge of the FBI before being officially confirmed as director. Patel's team denies the claim and says he has been patiently waiting for the confirmation process to play out. Education Secretary nominee Linda McMahon is the next cabinet pick of President Trump's to face a showdown with lawmakers, and the first he has told to put yourself out of a job. We'll tune into that right now.
You've talked about the importance of alternative career pathways. When you were in the office, we discussed this. One of the major issues we hear on trying to push apprenticeships, not just to trades and not adult apprenticeships at 18, but 16, 17, 18-year-olds while they're in high school going and working a couple days a week at an insurance company, could be a law firm, anywhere, but learning what a job place looks like, coming back to school and learning things that might make them more successful there. One of the problems is that type of an apprenticeship, so many of the academic advisors are just focused on that 4-year college track. And that's what the parents are kind of expecting. They may not even realize what apprenticeships are around there. What can you do as Secretary of Education to share with high schools all across America that these other alternative pathways are available?
Well, certainly I've been on the record even when I ran for the Senate in the state of Connecticut. I ran twice and didn't win, but I always talked about how we needed skills in our country, that we did not have the trades that we need to have today. But I also talked about how parents, I think, are encouraging their children only to go to college and not necessarily recognizing that there are other avenues that those children could pursue. I clearly was a parent who were pushing both my children to go to college, but I realize today that there are other opportunities for students to succeed and enter into a pathway that they will be successful in their lives. So I think apprenticeships, internships, working the public-private sector to make sure that we have our curriculum that is designed for the needs of the communities and business. I think that's incredibly important. It's one of the things that we've we've striven to do at Sacred Heart University that I sit on the board of education. What are the needs of the community, and how can that curriculum be structured to satisfy that need? And that's, I think, critically important.
Great, and we're out of time. Of course, I've got millions more questions. Maybe we'll continue that discussion. I appreciate you being open about not wanting to end the Department of Education completely, and not your willingness to look at Pell Grants on a larger scale. Thank you.
Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a side note, I'm struck by the outburst of some of the protesters in the room, and a number of them have told us that they're teachers. Can you imagine them teaching, these people teaching our kids in classrooms across America, and they come here and act like children with outbursts and try to prevent us, in an attempt to prevent us from doing our job to move you forward, to do the important work that you have to do. For me, that's what this is all about. I have 3 daughters who are in grade school in public schools, and I want to get politics out of the classroom. I want political flags and political statements and ideologies out of the classroom, and I want teachers to teach our kids and prepare them for the jobs of the future. And I'm very intrigued with what President Trump is talking about in dismantling the federal Department of Education, because I served in the State House, and the Indiana State Constitution devotes a number of chapters to educating our kids. And the last time I checked, the federal Constitution doesn't say a single thing about education, because our founders in their wisdom recognized that is a role of the state. And Ms. McMahon, I know we've talked about this before, but this is about an attitude of empowering teachers and schools and moms and dads to give our kids the best chance that they can possibly have. And I know that you agree with this, but when I ask anyway, can't the state of Indiana do a whole lot better of a job of spending dollars on education rather than bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.?
I certainly believe that to be true, Senator, yes, and that is definitely what the president believes as well, that I'll be repetitive, that education is best handled closest to the child to understand what that child needs and what the community needs. And working with parents, parental rights are so important in educating our children, and I definitely believe that should be our return to the states.
Now, speaking of wasting money, the Biden Department of Education allocated over $1 billion in grants toward diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And that included $4 million toward a, quote, culturally responsive computer science camp for high schoolers, $1 million to train elementary teachers in Iowa on, quote, equity-centered education, $38,000 for a one-day session with a, quote, equity consultant in Michigan, countless dollars toward race-based hiring, which is unconstitutional and unlawful, by the way. Will you commit to ending all racial discrimination in government programming at the Department of Education?
That will be my goal, absolutely, to work, and I'd look forward to working with you and other members of the committee as well, and with Congress, to make sure that we can take the ideology, if you will, out of education and focus on actually teaching our students to read and to write and to do arithmetic, because they cannot be successful if they cannot do the basics.
Some of my colleagues today have talked about the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, and I think one of the motivators of that is money that flows from adversarial foreign countries like China and other countries with an anti-American agenda that are donated to many of our colleges and universities in the United States of America. And it turns out that the Department of Education plays a key role in reporting and making those foreign donations transparent. While I want to ban them altogether, China should never be donating money to colleges and universities in Indiana or anywhere else in the country. Have you thought about what other steps that we can take to eliminate foreign influences, especially anti-American influences on our college campuses?
Well, I think what we've seen is the lack of transparency of where the money comes from, how much, and what it's used for when it gets to colleges. And I think there absolutely has to be more transparency in tracking that money.
And I hope that I saw what President Trump did in his first term and the 4 years of tightening many of these donations and blocking them, making them transparent. And then I served on the Education Committee in the House for 8 years, so 4 years of President Trump, 4 years of President Biden. There was no attention paid to this under President Biden. Chinese Communist Party dollars flowing to colleges and universities that are no longer reported, made transparent. I know that will be a big priority of yours because we talked about it, and I want to do everything I can to help you block it, make it the public should know that adversaries of the United States of America are giving money to the universities that they're sending their kids to. So thank you very much for your leadership. You have my full support. I look forward to working with you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Senator Markey.
Thank you. Yesterday, President Trump said he'd like the Department of Education to be closed immediately. He called the department a big con job. Education funding helps us work towards a country where every student can go to their school knowing that they will get the same education as the family that can afford private school. Public school is not a con job. It's equality for every student, regardless of income. It helps guarantee that every student, including the 26 million low-income students, the 10 million rural, 5 million English language learners, 7 million disabled students, and 1 million homeless can go to public school knowing they have the same opportunity as every other student. Trump's crusade to abolish the Department of Education and, quote, root out waste and fraud and corruption for cuts to public schools is an attack on every public school student, parent, teacher, paraprofessional, administrator, and school worker in this country. Waste, fraud, and corruption is code for cuts to public education for all of those students. So I have here the text of a bill I've been working on, the No Cuts to Public Schools Act. This bill would guarantee that federal funding to public schools could not be cut during the length of President Trump's administration. Mr. McMahon, can you commit today to not cutting funding for public schools in this country?
Well, certainly what I'll commit to, sir, is that funding for schools is appropriated by Congress. And that funding should continue. Congress will continue to pass those laws. The Department of Education is not doing that.
So will you will you oppose any cuts to public education? Yes or no?
Well, the president is not saying that we should cut funding to public education.
Yes, he is.
He is
Yes,
simply saying, well, I would disagree with you there.
Elon Musk yesterday announced he would immediately cut $900 million from the Department of Education. And he stood right next to Trump and made that very clear. So the answer I'm looking for, by the way, is a yes. I will fight to make sure that public funding is not cut because that announcement was just made, the $900 million cut, and we know that's just a down payment to gut the education of every public school student in America. And by the way, to find the billions of dollars that are going to be needed for the tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires in our country, they have to go to the Department of Education, they have to go to Clean Air and Clean Water, they have to go to Medicaid, they have to go to the Affordable Care Act, they have to go to all of the programs that they are calling waste, fraud, and corruption, but that's just another way of saying the programs that help the poor and the sick and the elderly, the disabled in our society. That's what we are talking about, because they want all of these programs gutted to find the funding for the tax breaks. So DOGE, as it's rumbling through the Department of Education right now, just stands for Department of Gutting Education. That's what they're doing. They're inside looking at it. $900 billion is the down payment. So, Ms. McMahon, can you commit today to fight so that not $1 from public schools goes towards paying for tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires?
Well, that was certainly a broad view of what is going on right now today with trying to find waste, fraud, and abuse. The DOGE groups that are in the Department of Education, from my understanding, have looked at competitive contracts that are bidding, and let's see where that money's going. How's it being spent? I'm not there. If I may, Senator,
what they're doing,
you've asked me a question. I would really like the opportunity to answer.
What they're doing is first they announce the cuts, then they go to find where it is. So it's all backwards. And again, we know what the plot is. And ultimately, the answer I'm looking for is a yes, because if even $1 flows away from an educator or a student towards a billionaire tax break, that will be immoral in our country. Immoral. These kids deserve the funding which they are receiving. And Donald Trump and Elon Musk should be ashamed that they are working harder for billionaires than they are for working families, for these kids who need help. 90% of disabled of students go to public schools. 95% of students with disabilities go to public schools. And Trump and Musk want to take from those students to give to billionaires. That is immoral, it's wrong, it's unjust, and we're going to fight it every single step of the way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Senator Moody.
Hello, it's so great to be with you. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like for you to have some time to answer some questions. Wouldn't that be unique? I'm wondering, one of my very first important questions is it harder to sit composed and calm and focused among a bunch of WWE wrestlers, or is it harder to sit in this hearing with people popping up and yelling at you all day?
I can stay pretty composed and focused in either environment.
As you know, the United States Department of Education provides more than $120 billion in grants, and much of that flows through to our public university systems. And the Higher Education Act makes a condition for higher education to receive a single dollar of that money, that higher education institution has to be accredited. Now, that's not by the Department of Education. That they have delegated that to a private entities of persons that aren't accountable to voters, aren't accountable to the president, and they decide who's accredited, which institution actually is eligible to get all that money. In Florida, we have had the experience that our post-secondary institutional accreditor, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, also known as SACS, has decided that it will threaten that accreditation, meaning threaten our federal funding, if we even suggest that maybe a former policy leader, lawmaker, conservative might go into leadership in a university. Or one of my dear friends, Senator Scott, former Governor Scott, had suggested that he was going to go on campus and speak about hazing. Seems pretty expected. As a parent, I would want that. And our accreditation was threatened. Even in North Carolina, when they wanted to institute a policy focused on, or excuse me, a program focused on ideological diversity, their accreditation was threatened. As Attorney General of Florida, I sued. I think there's a constitutional problem with the Department of Education delegating that authority to a private organization who dictates whether someone can get federal funding and tries to insert their own preferences and policies down into the education policies of a state and force it on our educational institutions. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today. I don't think it's just frustrated Florida. I think, yes, we were one of the first states to stand up and fight and go to court and try and stop that. But a lot of the themes that you're hearing, especially with some of the nominees, are we're trying to stop unelected bureaucrats or unelected people in these private organizations that have been either getting a lot of authority or a lot of federal money pushing policies into the states, and we don't think that's right. So I wanted to talk to you. Do you think that's right?
No, I don't think that's right.
And if you're confirmed, which I expect that you will be, and I hope that you are, I'm very impressed not only with your some of your educational participation in your own state, but your managerial experience. I think we need that right now. But will you commit to me that you will look into some of the regulations and guidance documents that relate to higher education institutions being able to change their accreditors?
Yes, definitely. And I'd look forward to working with you on that. And there's been a lot of issues raised about these 5 to 7 creditors that are the ones that are deciding these fates today, and I think that needs to have a broad overview and review.
It may be that we have to look at the accreditation process, and as Congress, you might need to amend the Higher Education Act to make them more accountable. But I do believe, and we're still in litigation, I say we, I'm trying to change hats now as Senator Moody, but Florida is still in litigation about this issue because I do think it's a constitutional problem for an agency to delegate that kind of authority over to a private organization. And I think a lot of that delegation is really where you're seeing states getting frustrated, people getting frustrated, because in these agencies and in these private organizations, you're seeing an ideological agenda, a policy-driven agenda, and people that are willing to implement it, whether they have the authority or not. And I believe that is where you're seeing so much frustration and why you saw such an overwhelming expectation that this president change things. And I think you're going to help him do that. And I, for one, am looking forward to that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Moody. Now it is Senator Kim's turn.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming before us. I guess I just wanted to jump in. I've heard a couple times you mentioned that you believe that Congress would need to be involved if there is an effort to abolish the Department of Education. That's right?
Correct.
Do you know if President Trump shares that sentiment?
I've heard President Trump recently, over the last couple of weeks, in conjunction with his fervor to shut down the bureaucracy of the Department of Education, he has also stated that he will work with Congress to make that happen.
Do you know if Elon Musk, have you had any conversations with him about the Department of Education? Him
I have
or
not.
his team? Why I raise this is that, I just came from another hearing that was talking about foreign assistance, talking about USAID. USAID is another element of our federal government that was codified by Congress, and we see an effort there to dismantle it. Not fully abolish it, but dismantle it basically down to about 600 people. Gut everything, put it under the State Department. So I guess I wanted to just ask you, if something like that was proposed by the Trump administration for the Department of Education, does that have to come to Congress?
Certainly there are departments that I believe that are in the Department of Education by statute, and those have to be looked at.
And
could they be moved?
What elements of the Department of Education are those that are protected by statute?
I believe IDEA is. I think Title I is. And I'd like to discuss that, look into it and discuss it more fully with you.
But for those that are not codified by statute, you're saying those are ones that the executive branch can do as they please?
Well, I think that I would like to look into that more.
Why I kind of mentioned this as well is that, just in the first couple of weeks here, we had a lot of conversation about the surge of anti-Semitism, our strong support and making sure we're protecting students from that type of harassment, from that type of intimidation. Absolutely something we need to stand against in terms of anti-Semitism. But I guess I was alarmed because what we ended up seeing is that multiple attorneys and other staff members of the department's Office of Civil Rights have been placed on administrative leave with no notice, no explanation. And some of them were in the process of investigating cases directly related to anti-Semitic harassment. So I guess I wanted to just ask you, is that something you would support? Do you think that that's the right actions that we should be taking at this time that we see such a surge in anti-Semitism?
Well, Senator Kim, I know it's not a great comfort for me to say this morning that I am not yet confirmed and have not yet been in the department. I don't know about all the administrative people that have been put on leave. I want to look into that. I want to understand it. I want to assess the department. I can't do that unless I'm confirmed and I get there, but I would certainly be willing to come back to you with a more specific answer.
But does that concern you at all if if you're confirmed, would you make that a priority to go and see whether or not this is going to impact our ability to respond to anti-Semitism?
No, I would want to make sure that we have everything that we need to have in place to protect our students on campuses.
One thing that we have been having this debate on here in Congress is about this, and what we've seen is that Republicans have called for a 25% cut in the budget of the Office of Civil Rights. Is that something you would support?
I again, I would want to see exactly what that impact is going to be and understand it.
Look, I guess I'm frustrated because I feel like this is such a clear place where we can just say, yes, we want to make sure we have as much resources as possible to be able to fight anti-Semitism, to make sure that we're addressing these needs of such a surge. When we see a surge in anti-Semitism, of course we would want a surge in resources to focus on that. So I just wanted to raise that because this whole debate that we're having right now, it feels like it's untethered from just the reality on the ground. And I just urge you, if you are confirmed, that we are understanding the human impact of the problems that are here. I have a second grader and a fourth grader. I got two little boys. And I just had their parent-teacher conference. And yes, we talked through the performance of my kids, the data that NAPE and others are used, the Institute for Education Sciences. Now we're seeing $900 million cuts to that coming out from Elon Musk and his team. But I just raised this is the reason why teachers are concerned right now is not about their own salaries and their own careers. When they talk to me, they talk about the kids. They talk about the kids. That's I find that to be so powerful when these teachers, they're saying, look, I'm not asking about my own career. I'm asking about the kids. So just as you proceed, just remember that. Parents are very scared right now. Now yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kim. Senator also Brooks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just begin my remarks. Hello, thank you so much, Ms. McMahon, for being here today. And I'd like to just begin, follow up with what my colleague said and address what I regard as very disparaging comments. I'd just like to say first by one of my colleagues regarding the educators who have come here today. And in the same vein as Senator Kim, the educators who are here, my colleague referred to them as these people, and said, who would want to be taught by these people, the passionate educators who have come here today, not on behalf of themselves, they're here on behalf of our children. And I want to address how shameful it was to say who would want to be taught by them. They are exactly the kind of people who we want teaching our children. The question I have for you today, I know your parents were civil servants, and so you recognize the importance that they bring to their work, the care and concern that they bring to their work. And I have been very concerned regarding the treatment of many of our civil servants, those especially in the Department of Education. You may know that last night a number of them were laid off with 15 minutes to have their computers turned off, access to it, just treated really horribly. So the question I have for you, because one of my constituents on a town hall I hosted last night with 17,000 Marylanders said that they are working in a culture of fear at the department, and that civil servants at the department don't know who will be fired next, have little guidance, and feel like they can't do their jobs, and they care very much about the work they're doing. So how will you address the culture of fear in an environment where civil servants, both Democrats and Republicans, who are working there are feeling undervalued and attacked by this administration?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Senator. And it's always difficult to downsize. It's always difficult to restructure and reorganize in any department. I have faced that, in the business world, because you know that you do impact people's lives. But at this particular point, I know that there are people that are being placed on administrative leave, which means they are still receiving full benefits and salary while their jobs are being looked at and how the department is being evaluated overall. I think people should always be treated with respect and with humility. And I would hope that that is what is going on within the Department of Education. I'm not there in person to see that yet, but it was certainly something that I would strive to do in any reorganization that we would take.
Okay, and I'd also like to ask you regarding the president's targeting of legally binding collective bargaining agreements. He has really targeted those, to ask you whether you will commit to abiding by the agreement and upholding civil service employment protections.
I will certainly commit to working with you and to looking into those issues if I am confirmed to be the Secretary of Education.
And also to ask you whether you will commit to ensuring that federal workers with disabilities, many of them are very concerned about whether they will continue to have reasonable accommodations as required by law.
Well, as required by law is the key phrase there. Yes.
Okay, well, in the same vein, there are some who are concerned about being forced now to reapply for accommodations. These are people who have had those accommodations given to them, and they're being told now that they must reapply for those accommodations with their supervisors. And so will you commit that the department's civil servants with disabilities will have their reasonable accommodations honored without interference or delay?
I'll certainly commit, if I'm there and confirmed, to look into all of those and to get back to you.
Okay. And finally, I'd like to ask you regarding the freezing of funds. If you are confirmed, would you support any directive from the president to freeze funds that have been appropriated by Congress, including funds that students and families rely on to pay for college?
If they've been appropriated by Congress, those funds should be disseminated.
Okay, and so you would block any directive. You would not adhere to any directive, including some of our HBCUs in my state, Bowie, Coppin State, Morgan State. You would not interfere with the freezing of those funds.
I commit to you that I will look into every single one of those programs so that I can get back to you and say, this is what I've found, this is what I've discovered, this is what the action is being taken against it or in favor of it, because I'd want to be very inclusive with you on that regard.
Okay, the final question, I just have 9 seconds here. Title I, I know that you said you support it. If the Department of Education is dismantled, what will you do to protect the students who are disadvantaged and impoverished on Title I funds?
Well, Title I funds are appropriated by Congress. They flow directly to the states today. They go to the State Department of Education, then they're deployed to the districts. So the Department of Education is not really involved in that distribution.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Brooks. Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 18 letters opposing Ms. McCann as Secretary of Education.
So ordered. I will now conclude, but let me first say that the Capitol Police are requesting that the audience remain seated until Ms. McMahon leaves. So just to first say that. Ms. McMahon, thank you very much for being here. You've handled yourself extremely well. I now ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record 55 letters of support for Ms. McMahon's nomination. And this concludes our hearing. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due tomorrow at 5 p.m. Once more, audience, please stay seated till Ms. McMahon leaves. Thank you.
Thank you.
My dad was a farmer, and when I saw him on a horse, the guy was bigger than life. One of the things that he had a hard time doing was showing the emotion. Maybe it was because the way he was raised, or believing that men provide and they don't struggle. But we all struggle. I want to show emotion to my kids. I want them to know when I'm happy, I want them to know when I'm sad, and I want them to see me working through things. The biggest reward I get from being a dad is watching my kids accomplish a goal, watching them light up. Nothing brings a bigger smile to my face. So I make my kids a priority. Whether it's hitting a baseball, a dance rehearsal, you name it, I'm there. They're gonna remember that they grew up loved. Be brave. Be there every day. And allow your kids to know that it's okay to struggle. That even dad doesn't know the answer sometimes, but we're gonna figure it out together.
I didn't ask to lose my mother or to be abused at 5 years old. I didn't ask to be kicked out of my house with nowhere to go. I didn't ask for any of this. But I did ask for help, and Covenant House was there. Thanks to their love and support, and to generous people like you, I got what I needed to take control of my life.
For the young people who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations, Covenant House is there providing safety, hope, and a brighter future. Call or go online now. For a gift of only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can provide hot meals, safe shelter, medical care, and love to more than 2,000 young people who sleep at a Covenant house every night. 1 in 10 young adults will experience homelessness this year. Your gift can help reach them when they need it most.
I didn't ask for my parents and my family to disown me. I didn't ask to end up in a homeless shelter. The beauty of it all is that I found Covenant House.
The need is overwhelming, but your monthly support will make sure no young person is ever turned away. Call or go online right now to safeplacetosleep.org with your gift of just $19 a month. With your monthly donation, you'll receive this soft, comforting blanket as a reminder of the warmth and safety your gift will provide a young person tonight.
Covenant House really helped me and really helped mold me into the woman I am today. If there's no Covenant House, where would I be today?
Your monthly gift is urgently needed to reach young people in communities like yours who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations. Show them they're loved and not alone. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org.
Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is confirmed as the next Secretary of Health and Human Services, and a key development in the nomination of Kash Patel to lead the FBI. President Trump is set to unveil a new round of reciprocal tariffs. Details about the upcoming announcement. Trade tensions heat up. Australia defends its aluminum exports as the U.S. imposes new tariffs. China calls the tariffs protectionist, while Canada warns of job losses. At least 28 people are injured after an attack in Germany. The incident took place in the same city. Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth are scheduled to visit this weekend. What we know so far. Progress on the stalled Gaza ceasefire deal. Hamas says they still plan to release the 3 Israeli hostages at the end of the week. What we know so far. Elon Musk says he will withdraw his nearly $100 billion bid for OpenAI if the ChatGPT maker remains a nonprofit.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Today is Thursday, February 13th. I'm Stephanie Cox. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to become the next Health Secretary of the United States. He just secured enough Senate votes to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. President Trump nominated Kennedy soon after entering office, but the nomination faced a lot of criticism. During confirmation hearings, senators asked Kennedy about his alleged skepticism against vaccines, among other things. But Kennedy also faced a lot of support, especially from people who voted for Trump during the general election. Kennedy says he'll prioritize combating chronic disease, which he believes is the result of an unhealthy diet and additives in food, among other things. According to Kennedy, health agencies in the past have not spent enough time trying to figure out the root cause of illness, such as diet. Senate Judiciary Committee has voted today to advance Kash Patel's nomination to lead the FBI. Lawmakers voted 12-10 along party lines. Patel is likely to be considered by the full Senate as early as next week. Democratic senators delayed Patel's vote last month after his first confirmation hearing. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said Democrats are trying to get him to testify again after he already testified for 5 hours, submitted thousands of documents, and wrote 150 pages in response to lawmakers' questions. Senator Dick Durbin accused Patel of directing a purge of the FBI before being officially confirmed as director. Patel's team denies the claim and says he has been patiently waiting for the confirmation process to play out. At least 28 people were injured after an attack in Germany. A man from Afghanistan allegedly drove a car into a crowd earlier today. The attack took place in the city of Munich. This comes as the city prepares for a top-level security conference. Police later described the attack, while Germany's Chancellor promised no leniency for the suspect.
After the perpetrator drove into the crowd, and it looked as if he was going to continue his journey, a shot was seemingly fired in the direction of the perpetrator or at the vehicle. Police escorts then overpowered the perpetrator.
Anyone who commits crimes in Germany will not only be severely punished and sent to prison,
they must also expect that they will not be able to continue their stay in Germany. And that also applies to countries where it is very difficult to repatriate someone. That's why the government I lead has managed to resume and carry out repatriations to Afghanistan, despite the lack of diplomatic relations.
The 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker allegedly drove into a crowd of around 1,500 people. The victims were at a rally by a German trade union. Security has been in sharp focus in Germany ahead of a federal election next week. The Munich Security Conference is also set to take place this weekend in the same city where today's attack took place. Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and others are scheduled to attend. Vice President Vance arrived in Germany this morning, one day ahead of the Munich Security Conference. The U.S. delegation is led by J.D. Vance. Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will likely meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the event. The meeting comes after President Trump spoke by phone with Russia's Vladimir Putin. He said Ukraine could neither have all of its land back nor join NATO. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance also visited the Dachau Memorial Center after being greeted by Bavarian State Premier Markus Söder. President Trump said he plans to unveil reciprocal tariffs today. In a Truth Social post, Trump wrote that he will hold a news conference on reciprocal tariffs at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. He did not give details about the latest tariff plan. Trump has already announced 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports beginning on March 12th. He also imposed 10% tariffs on goods from China and a 30-day hold on tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico. The news conference will happen before Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's White House visit. Modi is scheduled to arrive at around 4 p.m. Eastern. And a look at how countries are reacting to the new U.S. tariffs. Australia insists it has fully complied with its aluminum export obligations to the U.S. as it seeks an exemption from the new tariffs on steel and aluminum. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on that and the responses of other countries to the new duties.
Australian Trade Minister Don Farrell addressed concerns on Thursday, countering claims that Australia killed the U.S. aluminum market. The executive order imposing tariffs said the volume of aluminum from Australia surged after it was granted a tariff exemption by Trump in 2018, with the country disregarding a verbal commitment to restrain aluminum supply. Trade Minister Farrell said Australia increased its aluminum exports with the blessing of the Biden administration after supply disruptions from Russia during its ongoing war with Ukraine.
There's nothing that Australian companies or the Australian governments have done that conflict with any arrangements that were in place.
As the world's sixth largest aluminum producer, Australia supplies just 2% of U.S. aluminum imports. Farrell questioned the logic of tariffs on a trade partner with a deficit.
Just to explain, total two-way trade between Australia and the United States is roughly $100 billion. $70 billion of that is product we buy from America.
China lashed out at the U.S. over tariffs on Thursday. The communist regime urged the United States to abandon what it called its zero-sum mentality. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacted to U.S. tariffs on Wednesday.
We don't want to be in a trade dispute. We think that the best thing for all of us in North America is to continue to work together.
Trudeau said the tariffs will backfire on the U.S., causing job losses.
We know that that will happen because that's exactly what happened last time tariffs were brought in on steel and aluminum in 2018. There were job losses.
Trump says tariffs will aid struggling industries in the United States. Roughly half of all aluminum used in the U.S. is imported, with the vast majority coming from Canada. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum also criticized the move, noting the U.S. runs a trade surplus with Mexico in steel and aluminum.
So, it is not in the United States' interest to impose steel and aluminum tariffs on Mexico.
The new steel and aluminum tariffs implemented by the Trump administration are set to take effect on March 12th. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Next, moving to the South China Sea. Australia raised concerns with Beijing earlier today over an air dispute above the waters. 2 days ago, China flew a fighter jet toward Australia's military aircraft while it was conducting a routine patrol over the South China Sea. Australia's defense minister said the patrol was conducted over international waters, adding that the Chinese fighter jet released flares near the Australian aircraft, almost hitting it. Australia's defense minister described China's move as unsafe and unprofessional, adding the department has already raised concerns with Canberra and Beijing. In response, a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry accused Australia of intruding on China's airspace. China claims almost the entire South China Sea as its own, but in 2016, international arbitration ruled that invalid. Countries passing through the waters face frequent harassment from Chinese troops. The State Department views China's claims and what it calls a campaign of bullying as unlawful. The European Union and Ukraine say it's crucial for them to be part of any peace talks between Russia and the U.S. Europe's foreign policy chief and Ukraine's president both say they won't accept any peace deal they weren't involved in.
Any agreement without us will fail because you need Europe and Ukraine to also implement the agreement. So without us at the table, you can agree on whatever, but it will just simply fail because of the implementation is not there.
Putin's plan is to make his negotiations bilateral between him and the United States. We, as a sovereign country, simply will not be able to accept any agreements without us.
This comes after President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier this week. Zelensky downplayed the significance of Trump calling Putin before him on Wednesday. Zelensky says this doesn't show Washington's real priorities, but he added that it was nonetheless unpleasant.
Just like all of you, I had problems sleeping. I had tried every pillow out there and nothing worked. I'd flip-flop all night, use my arm for support, and fall asleep, or I'd wake up with a sore neck or maybe a headache. Well, quality sleep comes from keeping your neck straight at night. You have to fill in that space between your head and your bed. That's why I invented MyPillow. MyPillow's patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs, and it doesn't matter if you sleep on your back, stomach, side, or any combination of all three.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night, and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get Classic King MyPillows for only $19.98. Queen size just $18.98. Standard Classic MyPillows only $14.98. That's right, only $14.98. Plus all orders $75 or more ship absolutely free.
There is a road laid out for me.
Boxes everywhere. And this is going to be Addie's room.
I am
I think you're really going to like it.
I hope so. Yeah. I know this road is there for me. There is a long way.
First night here, but Amy seems cool.
Ways down by the river. I am blind, but I need not see.
I got this.
I know it's there for me.
Okay.
If I'm really free, take me down to the river and wash me.
My dad was a farmer, and when I saw him on a horse, the guy was bigger than life. One of the things that he had a hard time doing was showing the emotion. Maybe it was because the way he was raised, or believing that men provide and they don't struggle. But we all struggle. I want to show emotion to my kids. I want them to know when I'm happy, I want them to know when I'm sad, and I want them to see me working through things. The biggest reward I get from being a dad is watching my kids accomplish a goal, watching them light up. Nothing brings a bigger smile to my face. So I make my kids a priority. Whether it's hitting a baseball, a dance rehearsal, you name it, I'm there. They're gonna remember that they grew up loved. Be brave. Be there every day. And allow your kids to know that it's okay to struggle, that even dad doesn't know the answer sometimes, but we're gonna figure it out together.
Welcome back. Hamas has said they plan to still release 3 Israeli hostages this weekend. That's after accusing Israel of violating the recent ceasefire agreement. Terror group Hamas earlier threatened to delay the release of the hostages from the Gaza Strip. A Hamas spokesperson said Hamas does not want to see the collapse of the ceasefire agreement. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Hamas this week that if the hostages are not returned by Saturday, the fighting would continue. President Trump made 2 similar warnings. January 19th ceasefire agreement halted 15 months of war. The parties are still in the first phase of the 3-phase ceasefire plan. And President Trump has helped secure the release of 3 inmates held in Belarus, including 1 American. The American requested their name and identifying information be withheld from the public to protect their privacy. The other 2 freed prisoners have been identified as Elon Mashuk, detained during mass anti-government protests in Belarus in August 2020, and Andrei Kuznechchik, a journalist for Radio Free Europe's Belarus service. He was charged in 2022 with allegedly establishing an extremist group and sentenced to 6 years in prison after a 1-day trial. An exiled Belarusian opposition leader thanked the Trump administration for helping to secure the release of 3 political prisoners. Elon Musk says he will drop his nearly $100 billion attempt to buy OpenAI if it maintains its nonprofit structure. OpenAI is the maker of ChatGPT and the world's most valuable AI company. It currently operates as a nonprofit. On Monday, Musk announced he's leading a group of investors who have offered to buy OpenAI for more than $97 billion. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman criticized the offer publicly. In a court filing yesterday, the company questioned Musk's rationale for the bid, but hasn't yet rejected it. The recent developments are part of a battle between Musk and Altman for control of the future of artificial intelligence. Musk was a co-founder of OpenAI, but eventually left the company. Initial jobless claims in the U.S. dipped last week, indicating stability in the labor market. Department of Labor data released today showed there were roughly 213,000 initial claims filed. That's down 7,000 from a week earlier. Continuing claims, which are filed by people who have received 1 week or more of benefits, dropped to 1.85 million. That was a decline of 36,000 claims. Wholesale inflation in the U.S. stayed high last month, signaling even higher prices could be ahead for American shoppers. The Producer Price Index measures average price changes seen by producers and manufacturers. Economists were expecting producer-level prices to slow on an annual basis, but the PPI was up 3.5% in January compared to a year earlier. The index is holding at its highest annual rate since February 2023. The overall PPI was pushed higher by fast-rising food and energy prices. That included a 44% jump in wholesale-level egg prices in January. Including food and energy, core PPI slowed down slightly in January. 2 crew members who were rescued after a Navy jet crashed off the coast of San Diego are in good condition. That's according to Navy officials. The 2 occupants of the EA-18G Growler ejected shortly before their jet plummeted into the water. The Coast Guard says they were picked up by a fishing boat and transferred to a nearby Customs and Border Patrol vessel. The San Diego Fire Rescue Department said it later took the crew members into a hospital in the area. The Coast Guard says it has 2 vessels safeguarding the wreckage. Further details of the crash weren't immediately available. 2 U.S. senators yesterday called for increased funding and staffing for air traffic control following a fatal mid-air collision near the nation's capital last month. The senators said the FAA is more than 3,500 air traffic controllers short of targeted staffing levels. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said last week he was reconsidering rules that allowed air traffic control staffing to be reduced before the fatal collision. He also plans to announce steps to increase more air traffic control training and applicants, and could also call for new incentives to keep retirement-eligible controllers on the job. The American Civil Liberties Union has sued the Trump administration over the illegal immigrants recently taken to Guantanamo Bay. Last week, the U.S. started using military aircraft to transport migrants to Cuba. Immigration advocates say this will result in the migrants being detained without legal representation. The lawsuit was filed yesterday in Washington, D.C. It says that detainees have a right to counsel and calls for immediate face-to-face access to the immigrants. A senior Department of Homeland Security official says there's a system for inmates to use the phone to reach lawyers. The official says that if the American Civil Liberties Union cares more about highly dangerous criminal aliens, including murderers and vicious gang members, than they do about American citizens, they should change their name, unquote. Rising inflation is causing the cost of essentials to go up. Groceries and gasoline got more expensive last month, with egg prices at an all-time high. A dozen eggs cost an average of $4.95 in January, according to the latest Consumer Price Index data. That's an all-time high, and it's expected to get worse. The ongoing bird flu outbreak has devastated poultry farms across the nation. The outbreak is causing a supply crunch. A spokesperson for Trader Joe's told the Epoch Times it is placing limits on egg purchases. Rosemary Farms, a family-owned business in California, is donating hundreds of thousands of eggs to victims and first responders of the LA wildfires. They said they're working with the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank and the nonprofit Gather for Food to donate around 270,000 eggs to residents. In addition, nearly 55,000 eggs will go to firefighters and first responders. This as eggs are reaching record high prices in the U.S. following a nationwide bird flu outbreak. New video from the Utah Transit Authority captures the moment a train hits an SUV. The accident happened last week in Layton, Utah. The SUV was pushed onto the tracks by a pickup truck. One angle shows the train conductor's perspective at the moment the locomotive strikes the stranded SUV. And there it is. Another view was filmed from behind the crossing. It captures the chain reaction leading up to the crash. As warning lights flashed at the crossing, a white SUV came to a stop but was rear-ended by a pickup truck, forcing it onto the tracks. The driver attempted to reverse under the crossing arms, but appeared to stall and exited the vehicle just before impact. According to local media, no injuries were reported, luckily. And a young woman gave birth to a baby girl on a Manhattan subway yesterday, according to New York City transit officials, which manages the city's subway and bus service. It happened just before noon. Passengers rushed to call 911 and inform the conductor. The conductor held the train while police officers and EMS responded. The mother is 25-year-old Jenny St. Pierre of Hollandale Beach, Florida. According to the New York Times, her family said they had reported her missing to police in September, and they knew that she was pregnant. Pierre and the baby were taken to Bellevue Hospital in good condition. New York City Transit's president said the birth was another example of New Yorkers coming together to help each other. And for round-the-clock original news coverage, watch us live at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. We'll be broadcasting live President Trump's speech on reciprocal tariffs right after this break. Stay tuned.
大提琴不仅仅是一件乐器，它是有生命、有感情的，需要我们精心的照顾。往往我们一个小小的动作，可能都会对人情绪产生微妙的影响。天音的品牌是福星，我们对于传统的理念很荣幸被神韵艺术团选为指定供应商。时间是酿造音色的不可替代的陪伴。我跟大提琴已经有60多年的友情了，每一把琴都有它自己的个性，熟悉它，才能真正发挥它的潜力。 所以我希望给你的每一把琴，都是首先我所信任的。
Just like all of you, I had problems sleeping. I had tried every pillow out there and nothing worked. I'd flip-flop all night, use my arm for support and fall asleep, or I'd wake up with a sore neck or maybe a headache. Well, quality sleep comes from keeping your neck straight at night. You have to fill in that space between your head and your bed. That's why I invented My Pillow. My Pillow's patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs, and it doesn't matter if you sleep on your back, stomach, side, or any combination of all three.
When I got My Pillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get Classic King My Pillows for only $19.98. Queen size just $18.98. Standard Classic My Pillows only $14.98. That's right, only $14.98. Plus all orders $75 or more ship absolutely free.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to become the next Health Secretary of the United States. He just secured enough Senate votes to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. President Trump nominated Kennedy soon after entering office, but the nomination faced a lot of criticism. During confirmation hearings, senators asked Kennedy about his alleged skepticism towards vaccines, among other things. But Kennedy also faced a lot of support, especially from people who voted for Trump during the general election. Kennedy says he'll prioritize combating chronic disease, which he believes is the result of an unhealthy diet and additives in food, among other things. According to Kennedy, health agencies in the past have not spent enough time trying to figure out the root cause of illness, such as diet. The Senate Judiciary Committee has voted today to advance Kash Patel's nomination to lead the FBI. Lawmakers voted 12-10 along party lines. Patel is likely to be considered by the full Senate as early as next week. Democratic senators delayed Patel's vote last month after his first confirmation hearing. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said Democrats are trying to get him to testify again after he already testified for 5 hours, submitted thousands of documents, and wrote 150 pages in response to lawmakers' questions. Senator Dick Durbin accused Patel of directing a purge of the FBI before being officially confirmed as director. Patel's team denies the claim and says he has been patiently waiting for the confirmation process to play out. At least 28 people were injured after an attack in Germany. A man from Afghanistan allegedly drove a car into a crowd earlier today. The attack took place in the city of Munich. This comes as the city prepares for a top-level security conference. Police later described the attack, while Germany's Chancellor promised no leniency for the suspect.
After the perpetrator drove into the crowd, and it looked as if he was going to continue his journey, a shot was seemingly fired in the direction of the perpetrator or at the vehicle. Police escorts then overpowered the perpetrator.
Anyone who commits crimes in Germany will not only be severely punished and sent to prison, they must also expect that they will not be able to continue their stay in Germany. And that also applies to countries where it is very difficult to repatriate someone. That's why the government I lead has managed to resume and carry out repatriations to Afghanistan, despite the lack of diplomatic relations.
The 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker allegedly drove into a crowd of around 1,500 people. The victims were at a rally by a German trade union. Security has been sharp in focus in Germany ahead of a federal election next week. The Munich Security Conference is also set to take place this weekend in the same city where today's attack took place. Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and others are scheduled to attend. Vice President Vance arrived in Germany this morning, one day ahead of the Munich Security Conference. The U.S. delegation is led by J.D. Vance. Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will likely meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the event. The meeting comes after President Trump spoke by phone with Russia's Vladimir Putin. He said Ukraine could neither have all of its land back nor join NATO. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance also visited the Dachau Memorial Center after being greeted by Bavarian State Premier Markus Söder. And a look at how countries are reacting to new U.S. tariffs. Australia insists it has fully complied with its aluminum export obligations to the U.S. as it seeks an exemption from the new tariffs on steel and aluminum. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on that and the responses of other countries to the new duties.
Australian Trade Minister Don Farrell addressed concerns on Thursday, countering claims that Australia killed the U.S. aluminum market. The executive order imposing tariffs said the volume of aluminum from Australia surged after it was granted a tariff exemption by Trump in 2018, with the country disregarding a verbal commitment to restrain aluminum supply. Trade Minister Farrell said Australia increased its aluminum exports with the blessing of the Biden administration after supply disruptions from Russia during its ongoing war with Ukraine.
There's nothing that Australian companies or the Australian governments have done that conflict with any arrangements that were in place.
As the world's sixth largest aluminum producer, Australia supplies just 2% of U.S. aluminum imports. Farrell questioned the logic of tariffs on a trade partner with a deficit.
Just to explain, total two-way trade between Australia and the United States is roughly $100 billion. $70 billion of that is product we buy from America.
China lashed out at the U.S. over tariffs on Thursday. The communist regime urged the United States to abandon what it called its zero-sum mentality. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacted to U.S. tariffs on Wednesday.
We don't want to be in a trade dispute. We think that the best thing for all of us in North America is to continue to work together.
Trudeau said the tariffs will backfire on the U.S., causing job losses.
We know that that will happen because that's exactly what happened last time tariffs were brought in on steel and aluminum in 2018. There were job losses.
Trump says tariffs will aid struggling industries in the United States. Roughly half of all aluminum used in the U.S. is imported, with the vast majority coming from Canada. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum also criticized the move, noting the U.S. runs a trade surplus with Mexico in steel and aluminum.
So, it is not in the United States' interest to impose steel and aluminum tariffs on Mexico.
The new steel and aluminum tariffs implemented by the Trump administration are set to take effect on March 12th. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Next, moving to the South China Sea. Australia raised concerns with Beijing earlier today over an air dispute above the waters. 2 days ago, China flew a fighter jet toward Australia's military aircraft while it was conducting a routine patrol over the South China Sea. Australia's defense minister said the patrol was conducted over international waters, adding that the Chinese fighter jet released flares near the Australian aircraft, almost hitting it. Australia's defense minister described China's move as unsafe and unprofessional, adding the department has already raised concerns with Canberra and Beijing. In response, a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry accused Australia of intruding on China's airspace. China claims almost the entire South China Sea as its own, but a 2016 international arbitration ruled that invalid. Countries passing through the waters face frequent harassment from Chinese troops. The State Department views China's claims and what it calls a campaign of bullying as unlawful. The European Union and Ukraine say it's crucial for them to be part of any peace talks between Russia and the U.S. Europe's foreign policy chief and Ukraine's president both say they won't accept any peace deal they weren't involved in.
Any agreement without us will fail because you need Europe and Ukraine to also implement the agreement. So without us at the table, you can agree on whatever, but it will just simply fail because of the implementation is not there.
Putin's plan is to make his negotiations bilateral between him and the United States. We, as a sovereign country, simply will not be able to accept any agreements without us.
The
This comes after President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier this week. Zelensky downplayed the significance of Trump calling Putin before him on Wednesday. Zelensky said this does not show Washington's real priorities, but he added that it was nonetheless unpleasant. Hamas said they plan to still release 3 Israeli hostages this weekend. That's after accusing Israel of violating the recent ceasefire agreement. Terror group Hamas earlier threatened to delay the release of the hostages from the Gaza Strip. A Hamas spokesperson said Hamas does not want to see the collapse of the ceasefire agreement. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Hamas this week that if the hostages are not returned by Saturday, the fighting would continue. President Trump made 2 similar warnings. The January 19th ceasefire agreement halted 15 months of war. The parties are still in the first phase of the 3-phase ceasefire plan. Elon Musk says he will drop his nearly $100 billion attempt to buy OpenAI if it maintains its nonprofit structure. OpenAI is the maker of ChatGPT and the world's most valuable AI company. It currently operates as a nonprofit. On Monday, Musk announced he's leading a group of investors who have offered to buy OpenAI for more than $97 billion. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman criticized the offer publicly. In a court filing yesterday, the company questioned Musk's rationale for the bid, but it hasn't yet rejected it. The recent developments are part of a battle between Musk and Altman for control of the future of artificial intelligence. Musk was a co-founder of OpenAI, but eventually left the company. The Trump administration can now go ahead with its buyout plan for federal workers. A federal judge lifted the block placed earlier on the program, freeing tens of thousands of civil servants to take the buyout. Here are the details.
U.S. District Judge George O'Toole in Boston said Wednesday there was no legal standing to block President Trump's federal downsizing program. O'Toole also said the court did not have jurisdiction over the matter. The unions who had sued to block the buyout did not immediately say whether they would appeal the judge's decision. The White House says around 75,000 workers, or 3% of the federal government's civilian workforce, have signed up to take the buyout. The Trump administration has promised to pay their salaries through October without requiring them to work. But current spending laws expire March 14th, and unions argue there's no guarantee salaries will be funded beyond that point. In a statement, the Office of Personnel Management said, quote, "There is no longer any doubt the deferred resignation program was both legal and a valuable option for federal employees." As part of his plan to cut spending, Trump has enlisted Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to comb through payment and personnel records. On Wednesday, the White House released receipts on federal contracts it says DOGE helped cut.
These are screenshots of contracts that DOGE found across our government. This is a DEI contract, $36,000 for U.S. citizenship and immigration services. That is against the president's policies and his America First agenda. This is a $3.4 million contract, a Council for Inclusive Innovation at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Department of Commerce, another DEI contract that DOGE identified. I can continue to go through these.
Democrats have criticized Trump and DOGE for a lack of oversight and transparency. The White House pushed back on this argument, saying Musk is being closely watched.
Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. He's also now one of the most highly scrutinized men in the world alongside President Trump because of what he's doing and the access that he is allowing. So there's great transparency.
On Wednesday, NASA said DOGE planned to examine the space agency's spending. Acting Administrator Janet Petro told reporters hundreds of NASA employees had accepted Trump's buyout plan. Elon Musk's SpaceX has roughly $15 billion in contracts with NASA. Most of them are for bringing astronauts to and from the International Space Station and to land astronauts on the moon. When asked if this created a conflict of interest, Petro said NASA has very strict conflict of interest policies. She said the agency's legal office would vet any DOGE employees for such conflicts. Meanwhile, DOGE announced Wednesday night its website is now live. It currently has a feed of the panel's social media posts and charts summarizing various aspects of the federal government. DOGE says details on cost cutting and how much it says it has saved will be up soon.
If joint pain from aging is slowing you down, Omega XL can help you get back in the saddle, just like it did for John Walsh.
Today I'm here at my ranch exercising some of my polo ponies. Got to be really fit to ride these horses. So as you get older, it gets tougher. I was starting to suffer some of that business. And then I ran into somebody who said, look, you should try Omega XL. And look what it's done. I feel better than I've felt in the last 30 years.
I'm Reve Walsh. I'm John Walsh's wife. I ride fox hunters, and sometimes I'm in the saddle for 3-5 hours at a time. A lot of work out here.
I wouldn't have been able to do this. Muck a stall, throw hay, do all the things that needs to be done on a ranch a couple years ago. But Omega XL gave me the ability to get back in the saddle. It works great.
Once you try it, you don't want to be without it. Makes a huge difference.
It does. Take it every single day, and you know, there's a benefit. It's made you a lot nicer to me.
If you've been living with pain, it's time to get this special offer, the Omega XL, the joint health supplement that millions have trusted for more than 20 years. Omega XL, it's sourced from the green-lipped mussel, exclusively found in the pristine waters of New Zealand, some of the cleanest waters on Earth. Omega XL, it's natural, drug-free, and it's backed by more than 40 years of clinical research that show it really works. Try Omega XL today. Pick up your phone and call the number at the bottom of your screen right now for a special offer. Buy one, get two free. 2 bottles of Omega XL plus Vitamin XL D3, a value of more than $100. But call today and you pay only $39.95. That's a savings of more than 60%. Plus, it's backed by our 60-day money-back guarantee.
Try it. You got nothing to lose.
Call or go online right now to get this special offer. 2 bottles of Omega XL plus Vitamin XL D3 for only $39.95. Call now.
First time that I went to see him, a lot of stuff came into my mind because I wasn't prepared at all. I know the first 3 months of his life were really important, and I wanted to be there all the time for him. First time he was like, "Daddy, Daddy." That was one of his first words. He grew up so quick. He just surprised me every day. He's really smart. I really think he can be an astronaut, president. But I'm gonna support him for wherever he wants to be. If you want to be a photographer, musician, whatever. As a father, I guess you don't focus on you. I put himself first. That's what a dad does.
U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has announced a new lawsuit against the state of New York for protecting illegal immigrants from arrest. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the story.
Attorney General Pam Bondi announced on Wednesday that the Justice Department is suing New York over its so-called sanctuary city laws, which prevents law enforcement from arresting illegal immigrants. Bondi says that the DOJ filed the suit against the state of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul, Attorney General Letitia James, and State DMV Commissioner Mark Schroeder. Bondi criticized New York's green light laws, saying that they prevent law enforcement from accessing an individual's immigration status.
New York has chosen to prioritize illegal aliens over American citizens. It stops today. Millions of illegal aliens with violent records have flooded into our communities, bringing violence and deadly drugs with them.
The DOJ filed a similar lawsuit last week against the state of Illinois for such sanctuary city laws. And in announcing the lawsuit on Wednesday, Bondi was joined by the mother of Kayla Hamilton, a 20-year-old who was raped and killed by an illegal immigrant, an MS-13 gang member from El Salvador.
And he had a criminal record in 2020 in El Salvador for illicit gang activity. He came over as an unoccupied alien child, saying that he was afraid of gang activity in his country. Health and Human Services called him a nice boy, and he showed age-appropriate behavior. That fell so wrong when he murdered my daughter.
Last week, Bondi ordered the DOJ to pause all funds to sanctuary cities. Now, it's not clear how long the pause is, but in the meantime, the DOJ is reviewing any contracts in those cities that may break the law. Federal law prohibits state and local governments from blocking immigration officers from accessing individual citizenship status. But several sanctuary cities have policies that restrict local authorities from cooperating with federal immigration officers, and Bondi ordered the DOJ to investigate such incidents. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
This week, 3 storms are expected to impact communities across the U.S. The first 2 storms impacting the central and eastern U.S., bringing snow to the north and heavy rainfall to the south, began Tuesday. While the third storm of the week slams into California, bringing a substantial mudslide and debris flow threat for people still suffering from LA's historic wildfires.
3 storms are hitting the U.S. this week with a winter combo of rain, snow, and sleet. The first storm had tens of millions of people under winter alerts across the mid-Atlantic and Appalachians, wreaking havoc and dumping snow. Students at Virginia Tech celebrated canceled classes Tuesday with a snowball fight. Virginia State Police reported more than 300 crashes and at least 24 injuries.
When the temperature drops, we'll be back out putting salt and sand on the bridges and the overpasses.
The second storm right behind it.
It looks like it's going to be a rough one.
Bringing snow and ice to central U.S. and heavy rain further south. Cities like Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, Des Moines, and Detroit facing up to a half-foot of snow.
Oh, it's straight up blizzard out here. I had to slow down, I had to stop.
One truck driver coming from Denver was stuck on the side of the road for 6 hours, forced to stop deliveries until the roads in eastern Kansas were clear. A third storm expected to slam California on Thursday. Residents sandbagging and installing temporary barriers ahead of heavy rain and possible flooding. Evacuation warnings have been issued in the Santa Barbara area burned by recent wildfires. The region is expecting several inches of rain and has the potential for flooding and mudslides.
We have the whole hillside behind me has been denuded from the fire, and it already slid a little bit, and now we're preparing that it's going to slide a whole bunch more.
While Los Angeles is still recovering from recent wildfires, heavy rain is on the way, with burn scar areas as heightened risk. Officials are urging residents to stay vigilant as the storm moves in. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Light rain began falling across metro Los Angeles and Southern California on Wednesday as a powerful storm system moves in, with rain expected through the night. The storm is forecast to deliver between 1.5 and 3 inches of rain throughout the Los Angeles area. LA County Public Works Director Mark Pastrana gave an update at a press conference Wednesday.
We expect more intense rain to begin occurring tomorrow mid-morning and get the most intense portion of this rain right now forecast is in the later part of the afternoon into the evening of Thursday and through Thursday morning into Friday.
He warned that residents in burn scar areas face heightened risks.
It does present a higher risk to our residents, particularly those that are living within the burn scar areas, not only Palisades and Eaton Fire area, but any burn scar area within the last year.
LA County Sheriff Robert Luna reassured the public that additional personnel are ready for deployment.
Our search and rescue teams, volunteers on patrol, and incident management teams have all placed on standby, along with our Air Rescue 5 helicopter crew. Deputies are prepared to assist our community members with humanitarian needs such as food, water, and essentials. They are helping residents prepare with sandbags and passing out mud and debris safety tips.
Homeless outreach teams are also working to relocate unsheltered residents from flood-prone areas. 2 disaster recovery centers, including one at UCLA Research Park and another in Altadena, are open daily from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. to assist affected residents. Supervisor Lindsay Horvath said crews have reinforced flood channels and basins and are ready for canyon roads and PCH, urging residents to stay vigilant. The National Weather Service issued a flash flood watch through Thursday evening. With the rain ahead, Los Angeles is gearing up for Phase 2 of debris removal for damaged homes. To combat exploitation, authorities have announced stricter penalties for price gouging.
Yesterday, our board took additional action to affirm our decision, increasing the penalties for price gouging up to $50,000 and enhancing our enforcement. We don't want anyone being preyed upon during this very difficult time.
She says this will be effective countywide. Christina Corona, NTD News.
What has lasted 5,000 years was once almost lost. Now, the world awaits the divine culture's return.
Hi friends, Richard Karn here. Now I'm known as the guy who can fix just about anything, but the technology in most appliances requires very special training to fix. My point is, even I know when I've met my match, and that's why my family has Choice Home Warranty. So we won't get stuck with high-priced repairs.
Choice Home Warranty covers over 25 major home systems and appliances. That's your AC, heating, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and so much more.
Imagine for less than a cup of coffee a day, Choice Home Warranty can help protect you from expensive major system and appliance breakdowns that your homeowner's insurance doesn't cover. But you have to call now before it's too late.
Every homeowner should have Choice Home Warranty. Your homeowner's insurance is not going to cover your appliances.
Washing machine, dryer, refrigerator, air condition. If I had any issues arise, they were able to take care of it immediately.
Now, homeowner's insurance won't protect you when your home's major systems and appliances break down due to normal wear and tear. But Choice Home Warranty will. They can help cover repairs and replacements.
Choice Home Warranty is the best warranty we've ever used. It would save you so much money in the long run.
Hey, I'm not the only one raving about Choice Home Warranty. They were named a Best Home Warranty Company and Best Claim Service by U.S. News 360 Reviews.
Call Choice Home Warranty now and get access to a nationwide network of over 15,000 technicians and the latest appointment setting technology so you'll know when they're on their way.
If I have an issue with an appliance or something around the house, I just call up Choice Home Warranty and I don't have to worry about that.
So, do what this old DIYer did and call Choice Home Warranty now before something breaks down. Tell them I sent you and get your first month free.
Call Choice Home Warranty before it's too late and get protection for your heating, AC, plumbing, kitchen and laundry appliances, and more. Call for your free quote today. Call in the next 5 minutes and get your first month free. 800-360-6782. 800-360-6782.
Come to Mathis Home today and save big during our presidential savings event with markdowns in every department. We've got all the latest looks for every room in your house at incredible savings. Get huge discounts on hundreds of sofas in all the latest styles. Or shop online and find an unbeatable selection of over 230,000 items. We've got it all. For great quality, all the latest styles, and best value, come to the presidential savings event at Mathis Home.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth holds a press conference after a NATO defense ministers meeting. Let's tune in.
It is great to be here at NATO with 31 allies, also with my wife Jenny, who's been meeting with families of U.S. troops, both here in Germany, and we're heading to Poland right after this as well. That's what this is all about for me, for President Trump, and the Defense Department. I also want to express a special thanks to the Secretary General, Secretary General Rutte, for your boldness, for your friendship, for your leadership, and most especially for your urgency of the matter at hand, which is great to see from the leader of NATO. Look forward to working very closely with him and his team. And before we're talking about what we've done at the ministerial, I want to reaffirm a few things from this podium. First, as we see it, NATO's strategic objectives are to prevent great power conflict in Europe, deter nuclear and non-nuclear aggression, and defeat threats to treaty allies should deterrence fail. Second, the U.S. is committed to building a stronger, more lethal NATO. However, we must ensure that European and Canadian commitment to Article 3 of this treaty is just as strong. Article 3 says that allies, and I quote, by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. Leaders of our European allies should take primary responsibility for defense of the continent, which means security ownership by all allies, guided by a clear understanding of strategic realities. And it's an imperative given the strategic realities that we face. And that begins with increasing defense spending. 2% is a start, as President Trump has said, but it's not enough. Nor is 3%, nor is 4%, more like 5%. Real investment, real urgency. We can talk all we want about values. Values are important. But you can't shoot values. You can't shoot flags, and you can't shoot strong speeches. There is no replacement for hard power. As much as we may not want to like the world we live in some cases, there's nothing like hard power. It should be obvious that increasing allied European defense spending is critical, as the President of the United States has said. Also critical is expanding our defense industrial base capacity on both sides of the Atlantic. Our dollars, our euros, our pounds must become real capabilities. The U.S. is fully committed under President Trump's leadership to pursue these objectives in the face of today's threats. Yesterday, I had a chance to attend the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Today, participated in both the NATO Ministerial and the Ukraine Council. In both, we discussed Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. I had the chance to brief allies on President Trump's top priority, a diplomatic, peaceful end to this war, as quickly as possible, in a manner that creates enduring and durable peace. The American Defense Department fully supports the efforts of the Trump administration. And we look to allies to support this important work with leading on Ukraine security assistance now through increased contributions and greater ownership of future security assistance to Ukraine. To that end, I want to thank my UK counterpart, Defense Secretary John Healey, for hosting this Ukraine Defense Contact Group and for his leadership on support of Ukraine. President Trump gave me a clear mission: achieve peace through strength, as well as put America first, our people, our taxpayers, our borders, and our security. We are doing this by reviving the warrior ethos, rebuilding our military, and reestablishing deterrence. NATO should pursue these goals as well. NATO is a great alliance, the most successful defense alliance in history. But to endure for the future, our partners must do far more for Europe's defense. We must make NATO great again. It begins with defense spending, but must also include reviving the transatlantic defense industrial base, rapidly fielding emerging technologies, prioritizing readiness and lethality, and establishing real deterrence. Finally, I want to close with this. After World War II, first General and then President Eisenhower was one of NATO's strongest supporters. He believed in a strong relationship with Europe. However, by the end of Eisenhower's presidency, even he was concerned that Europe was not shouldering enough of its own defense, nearly making, in Eisenhower's words, quote, a sucker out of Uncle Sam. Well, like President Eisenhower, this administration believes in alliances, deeply believes in alliances. But make no mistake, President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker. Thank you, and we're glad to take some questions.
Thank you, Secretary Hegseth. You have focused on what Ukraine is giving up. What concessions will Putin be asked to make?
I would start by saying the arguments that have been made that somehow coming to the table right now is making concessions to Vladimir Putin outright that we otherwise, or that the President of the United States shouldn't otherwise make. I just reject that at its face. There's a reason why negotiations are happening right now, just a few weeks after President Trump was sworn in as President of the United States. Vladimir Putin responds to strength. In 2014, he invaded Crimea, not during the presidency of Donald Trump. Over 4 years, there was no Russian aggression. from 2016 to 2020. In 2022, Vladimir Putin took aggression on Ukraine. Once again, not while President Trump was president of the United States. So any suggestion that President Trump is doing anything other than negotiating from a position of strength is on its face ahistorical and false. So when you look at what he may have to give or take, what's in or what's out in those negotiations, we have the perfect deal maker at the table from a position of strength to deal with both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. No one's going to get everything that they want, understanding who committed the aggression in the first place. But I challenge anyone else to think of a world leader at this moment who, with credibility and strength, could bring those two leaders to the table and forge a durable peace that ultimately serves the interests of Ukraine, stops the killing and the death, which Trump has been clear he wants to do, and hopefully ultimately is guaranteed by strength of Europeans who are there prepared to back it up.
Why not invoke Article 5 then for the NATO peacekeeping forces that could potentially be deployed? How does that deter President Putin?
Well, I would say, I want to be clear about something as it pertains to NATO membership not being realistic outcome for negotiations. That's something that was stated as part of my remarks here, as part of a coordination with how we're executing these ongoing negotiations, which are led by President Trump. All of that said, these negotiations are led by President Trump. Everything is on the table in his conversations with Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. What he decides to allow or not allow is at the purview of the leader of the free world, of President Trump. So I'm not going to stand at this podium and declare what President Trump will do or won't do, what will be in or what will be out, what concessions will be made or what concessions are not made. I can look, as our team has, of what's realistic, likely on an outcome. I think realism is an important part of the conversation that hasn't existed enough inside conversations amongst friends. But simply pointing out realism, like the borders won't be rolled back to what everybody would like them to be in 2014, is not a concession to Vladimir Putin. It's a recognition of the hard power realities on the ground after a lot of investment and sacrifice, first by the Ukrainians and then by allies, and then a realization that a negotiated peace is going to be some sort of demarcation that neither side wants. But it's not my job as the Secretary of Defense to define the parameters of the President of the United States as he leads some of the most complex and consequential negotiations in the world.
Sticking with the U.S. press, let us go with Axios' Zach Basu, right in the far right.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Given the position you've now staked out, what leverage exactly is Ukraine being left with, especially if the U.S. also plans to wind down its military aid? And then quickly, if a NATO ally is attacked by Russia or any country, will the U.S. unequivocally uphold its obligations under Article 5, regardless of that country's
Well, we've said
spending?
we're committed to the alliance, and that's part of the alliance, right? You point out Article 5, you point out Article 3. It's just a cheap, I'm not saying it's cheap coming from you, but it's just a cheap political point to say, oh, we've left all the negotiating cards off the table by recognizing some realities that exist on the ground. President Zelensky understands the realities on the ground, President Putin understands the realities on the ground, and President Trump, as a deal maker, as a negotiator, understands those dynamics as well. By no means is anything that I state here, even though we lead the most powerful military in the world, hemming in the commander-in-chief in his negotiations to ultimately decide where it goes or does not go. Well, he's got all the cards he would like. And the interesting part is, oftentimes, while the conventional status quo mindset or the legacy media wants to play checkers, the same checkers game we've been playing for decades, President Trump, time and time again, finds a way to play chess. As a deal maker, as a businessman who understands how to create realities and opportunities where they otherwise may not exist. Take, for example, the conversations that our Treasury Secretary had in Kyiv recently with President Zelensky, which will continue in Munich with our Vice President and Secretary of State, around investments and resources inside Ukraine. I don't want to get ahead of any decision or announcement that could be made there. It could be any number of parameters. But President Trump, as a deal maker and a businessman, recognizes that an investment relationship with Ukraine, ultimately in the long term for the United States, is a lot more tangible than any promises or shared values we might have, even though we have them. There is something to relationships and deals in real ways, whether militarily or economically or diplomatically, that he sees that are possibilities that could forge together a lot of opportunities to show that solidarity that Vladimir Putin will clearly recognize. That's one of any number of other opportunities that this president will leverage in these high-stakes negotiations. So I just reject on its face the premise that somehow President Trump isn't dealing with a full set of cards when he's the one that can determine ultimately what cards he holds.
Great. Now shifting to the international press, we'll take the French wire service Agence France Presse with Max Delaney.
Thank you very much. Secretary of Defense, you've spoken about trying to force both Putin and Zelensky to the table. Can you give a guarantee that no deal will be forced on Ukraine that they do not want to accept, and also that you will include Europe in the negotiations about an issue that concerns European security? And can you tell us whether the US will continue to supply arms to Ukraine during any negotiations?
Well, to the first part of your question, that's not ultimately my decision. The President will lead these negotiations alongside our Secretary of State, our National Security Advisor, and numerous other officials that will be involved. And ultimately, we've played our role in talking to our NATO allies about what that would look like. President Trump, I want to point out, I've got the truths right here that he posted, called both, in case we missed it, Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky. Called them both. Any negotiation that's had will be had with both. I also am very encouraged by what the Secretary General has said here. Clearly attuned to the realities of the moment, the need for peace, and that the NATO alliance and European members will play a role in that. Ultimately, President Trump speaking to those two countries is central to the deal being made, but it affects a lot of people, of course. So I'm not going to be involved in those intimate diplomatic negotiations. That's for the pros atop the Trump administration who do diplomacy and negotiations. Ultimately, as security assistance, we have continued to provide what has been allocated. I think it would be fair to say that things like future funding, either less or more, could be on the table in negotiations as well. Whatever the president determines is the most robust carrot or stick on either side to induce a durable peace, understanding, obviously, the motivations that Vladimir Putin has had on Ukraine for quite some time. Thank you.
We'll have a second international press outlet. We'll go with the German paper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung with Dr. Thomas Kutschka.
Thanks a lot, Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Good afternoon. Mr. Secretary, 2 questions, please. The first one regarding the new defense investment pledge. When you and President Trump speak about raising it to 5%, do you mean European allies only, or do you mean the US as well, which is currently at 3.4%, according to NATO statistics? And if the latter is true, when do you think the US could possibly reach the goal of spending 5% on defense? That's number one. Number two, you've said yesterday that Europeans need to take ownership of their own conventional security. So should Europeans expect that ultimately the US would withdraw the bulk of their forces from Europe and just leave in place what is necessary for nuclear deterrence? I know there's a revision going on. I don't expect you to name any numbers, but maybe give us an outlook of what we should expect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think nobody can or should contest the extent of America's willingness to invest in national security. We have a budget of $850 billion spent on defense. I'm in the business of ensuring that every dollar of that is used wisely, which is why we're pushing a Pentagon audit and making sure that we're cutting fat so that we've got more at the tip of the spear. 3.4% is a very robust investment, larger than most of our allies within NATO. Any defense minister or secretary of defense that tells you they wouldn't want more would be lying to you. I understand that. Ultimately, we have our own budgetary considerations to be had, but I don't think an unwillingness of NATO allies to invest in their own defense spending can be dismissed away by trying to point at the $900 billion that America has invested around the globe to include the NATO alliance and saying that's not enough. So ultimately, we are very much committed to the NATO alliance and to our allies, but without burden sharing, without creating the right set of incentives for European countries to invest, then we would be forced to attempt to be everywhere for everybody all the time, which in a world of fiscal restraints is, again, to get back to that word reality, just not reality. So yes, we will continue to spend robustly. Our expectation of our friends, and we say this in solidarity, is you have to spend more on your defense, for your country, on that continent, understanding that the American military and the American people stand beside you as we have in NATO, but can't have the expectation of being the permanent guarantor, as I alluded to, from what even Eisenhower observed post-World War II. That shift has to happen. The peace dividend has to end. There are autocrats with ambitions around the globe, from Russia to the Communist Chinese. Either the West awakens to that reality and creates combat multipliers with their allies and partners, to include NATO, or we will abdicate that responsibility to somebody else with all the wrong values. You mentioned Europe. We have not said in any way that we're abandoning our allies in Europe. There have been no decisions based on troop levels. Again, that's a discussion to be had by the commander-in-chief in these high-stakes negotiations. And that would most likely come later on. But there is a recognition that the ambitions of the Communist Chinese are a threat to free people everywhere, to include America's interests in the Pacific. And it makes a lot of sense, just in a common sense way, to use our comparative advantages. European countries spending here in defense of this continent, in defense of allies here, against an aggressor on this continent with ambitions. That strikes me as the right place to invest. And I don't say that in a condescending way. I say that in a common sense, practical way. Investing in defense on the continent makes sense. We support that as well. It also makes sense comparatively and geographically for the United States, along with allies in the Pacific, like Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Australia and others, to also invest in allies and partners and capabilities in the Pacific to project power there in service of deterrence. That deterrent effect in the Pacific is one that really can only be led by the United States. We wish we could lead everywhere at all times. We will stand in solidarity with allies and partners and encourage everyone to invest in order to have force multiplication of what we represent, but it requires realistic conversations. Those with disingenuous motives in the media, I don't mean to look at you, I'm just saying anyone that suggests its abandonment are trying to drive a wedge between allies that does not exist. We are committed to that NATO alliance. We understand the importance of that partnership, but it can't endure on the status quo forever in light of the threats we face and fiscal realities. Europe has to spend more, NATO has to spend more, has to invest more, and we're very encouraged by what the Secretary General has said, and frankly, behind closed doors, what a lot of our allies have said as well, acknowledging that reality. And that's why when I say make NATO great again, it's what President Trump set out to do in 2017. The press said President Trump is abandoning NATO. He's turning his back on our NATO allies. That's what the headlines read in 2017 and 2018. What actually happened? That tough conversation created even more investment to the point where now almost every NATO country is meeting the 2% goal that was said to be egregious when he first said it. Now European countries are stepping up, and President Trump continues to ring the alarm bell that even more investment is required considering where we are. So suggestions of abandonment otherwise continue to be disingenuous, and we are proud to be part of this alliance and stand by it.
Sir,
I'll take a couple more. Sure.
Why don't we take one from a U.S. outlet and one from an international outlet? With the U.S. outlet, pardon me, sir, what we're going to take from the U.S. is Logan Rattick from Newsmax, please.
You talked about expanding the defense industrial base and also expediting foreign military sales. Can you expand on that a little bit and how important that is to NATO?
Well, one of the self-evident conclusions of the war in Ukraine was the underinvestment that both the European continent and America has had, unfortunately, in the defense industrial base. The ability to produce munitions, emerging technologies, rapidly and field them was a blind spot exposed through the aggression against Ukraine. Ukraine has responded to that, as we've had a chance to listen to a great deal. Europe is responding to that, and so is America. We have to do more to ensure, whether you call it the arsenal for democracy or defending the free world, if America can't build and export and build and provide rapid capabilities because we're too stale or static or bureaucratic or the Pentagon is bloated, then we're not able to field the systems we need in the future. So deep and dramatic reforms are coming at the Defense Department with the leadership of President Trump to ensure that we're investing robustly in our defense industrial base. A great example is shipbuilding. We need to vastly increase our ability to build ships and submarines, not just for ourselves, but to honor obligations to our allies as well. And we will do that. Foreign military sales is another thing I mentioned this morning with the Secretary General. We have, for a long time, been the country, by, with, and through, that our allies are able to supply major platforms and weapon systems like the F-35 and the Patriots and others. Whatever the system is, we need to reform that process so it's quicker. So a request today isn't delivered 7 years from now, but 3 years from now with less red tape and with the most efficient and effective technology possible. We hear that from our allies, and that's part of being a good faith partner, is we're going to invest in our defense industrial base. We're going to make sure foreign military sales are as rapid as possible, which again is a force multiplier for American power, which is something we want to do in a contested world.
For our final question, we'll go to an international outlet, the Japanese service NHK, with Tsuchiyo Sugita, please.
Sachio from NHK, the Japanese TV station. Thank you very much. I would like to ask about China. As you mentioned that U.S. will be prioritizing in deterring China. What role will you be expecting like Japan and IP4 countries to play in this context?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I would point out that President Trump has expressed a strong relationship with Xi Jinping. We don't have an inevitable desire to clash with China. There's a recognition that there are divergent interests which lead to a need for strength on the American side to ensure our interests are advanced, and that ultimately any aggression is deterred. That's a real thing, but we don't feel like conflict is inevitable and certainly don't seek conflict with China, and that's why President Trump has that good relationship with Xi Jinping. But it was prudent for us to work with allies and partners in the Pacific to ensure that that deterrence, hard power deterrence, not just reputational, but reality, exists. And that's why a lot of my first phone calls as Secretary of Defense were to Pacific allies, to Australia, to Japan, to South Korea, to the Philippines, and others, and will continue, because that, just as this alliance in Europe is critical, working by, with, and through allies and partners in that region who understand the reality of the ascendant Chinese threat will be critical. It can't be America alone. It won't be America alone if we are to deter that. So it is a focus. I've articulated that from day one. America achieves strength, whether it's in peace through the Ukrainian conflict or deterring it in the Pacific through strength. There's a reason why Donald Trump emphasizes peace through strength at every moment. My job alone as the Secretary of Defense is to ensure he has the strongest, most capable, most lethal military possible. Heaven forbid we have to use it. It's meant and built for deterrence, But if we have to, we can close with and destroy our enemies and bring our men and women home with success as quickly as possible. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to become the next Health Secretary of the United States. He just secured enough Senate votes to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. President Trump nominated Kennedy soon after entering office, but the nomination faced a lot of criticism. During confirmation hearings, senators asked Kennedy about his alleged skepticism against vaccines, among other things. But Kennedy also faced a lot of support, especially from people who voted for Trump during the general election. Kennedy says he'll prioritize combating chronic disease, which he believes is the result of an unhealthy diet and additives in food, among other things. According to Kennedy, health agencies in the past have not spent enough time trying to figure out the root cause of illness, such as diet. Senate Judiciary Committee has voted today to advance Kash Patel's nomination to lead the FBI. Lawmakers voted 12-10 along party lines. Patel is likely to be considered by the full Senate as early as next week. Democratic senators delayed Patel's vote last month after his first confirmation hearing. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said Democrats are trying to get him to testify again after he already testified for 5 hours, submitted thousands of documents, and wrote 150 pages in response to lawmakers' questions. Senator Dick Durbin accused Patel of directing a purge of the FBI before being officially confirmed as director. Patel's team denies the claim and says he has been patiently waiting for the confirmation process to play out. At least 28 people were injured after an attack in Germany. A man from Afghanistan allegedly drove a car into a crowd earlier today. The attack took place in the city of Munich. This comes as the city prepares for a top-level security conference. Police later described the attack, while Germany's Chancellor promised no leniency for the suspect.
After the perpetrator drove into the crowd, and it looked as if he was going to continue his journey, a shot was seemingly fired in the direction of the perpetrator or at the vehicle. Police escorts then overpowered the perpetrator.
Anyone who commits crimes in Germany will not only be severely punished and sent to prison, they must also expect that they will not be able to continue their stay in Germany. And that also applies to countries where it is very difficult to repatriate someone. That's why the government I lead has managed to resume and carry out repatriations to Afghanistan, despite the lack of diplomatic relations.
The 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker allegedly drove into a crowd of around 1,500 people. The victims were at a rally by a German trade union. Security has been in sharp focus in Germany ahead of a federal election next week. The Munich Security Conference is also set to take place this weekend in the same city where today's attack took place. Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and others are scheduled to attend. Vice President Vance arrived in Germany this morning, one day ahead of the Munich Security Conference. The U.S. delegation is led by J.D. Vance. Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will likely meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the event. The meeting comes after President Trump spoke by phone with Russia's Vladimir Putin. He said Ukraine could neither have all of its land back nor join NATO. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance also visited the Dachau Memorial Center after being greeted by Bavarian State Premier Markus Söder. For round-the-clock original news coverage, watch us live at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. And be sure to stick around for NTD Newsroom at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll cover more stories from the U.S. and around the world right after this break.